The morning sun cast long shadows across Arlington National Cemetery as Colonel James "Iron" Sullivan stood before the grave of his former gunner. 20 years had passed since Thomas Miller had died in his arms during Desert Storm, but time had done little to dull the pain. Sullivan placed a weathered hand on the cool marble headstone, the skin marked by scars and calluses earned over 3 decades of military service. "I think they're finally going to put me out to pasture, Tommy," he said quietly. "The world's changing, and men like us are dinosaurs now." At 58, Sullivan cut an imposing figure despite his age. 6 feet 2 inches of hardened muscle and disciplined posture, his face weathered by Vietnam's jungles and Iraq's deserts. His silver hair was still regulation short, his blue eyes sharp as they had been when he'd commanded a tank platoon through the Ashau Valley as a fresh lieutenant in '72. Those who served under him called him Iron Sullivan, not just for his unwavering resolve in battle, but for his unwillingness to bend to political winds that often swept through the Pentagon's corridors. As the early morning joggers and tourists began to populate the pathways of Arlington, Sullivan took one last look at his friend's grave and walked toward his car. His dress uniform still fit perfectly, a testament to his daily 5-mile runs and rigorous exercise regimen. The rows of medals and ribbons on his chest told a story few Americans could understand, a story of valor, sacrifice, and the brotherhood forged only in combat. The drive from Arlington to the Pentagon took less than 15 minutes, but for Sullivan it felt like crossing between worlds. The hallways bustled with activity as he made his way to the office of General Harold Westmoreland, Deputy Chief of Staff of the Army, and one of the few men Sullivan truly trusted in Washington's military hierarchy. Westmoreland had been his commander during the Gulf War, where Sullivan's tank regiment had spearheaded the assault against Saddam's elite Republican Guard. "Jim," Westmoreland said as Sullivan entered, rising to shake his hand, "glad you made it. Have a seat." Westmoreland had aged considerably in the 4 years since they'd last met. His once robust frame had thinned, and deep lines marked his face. The responsibilities of high command extracted their toll from even the strongest men. "I imagine you know why I've called you in," Westmoreland said, sliding a folder across the desk. Sullivan opened it and scanned the first page. Despite his iron discipline, he could not conceal the flash of anger that crossed his face. 6 months, Sullivan said flatly. "After 30 years of service, they're giving me 6 months to disband my regiment, the best armored fighting force this country has ever produced, and they're scrapping it like obsolete equipment." "It's not personal, Jim. The entire military is restructuring. The war on terror demands lighter, more mobile forces. The Abrams tanks are magnificent machines, but they're expensive to maintain and deploy. The future is Stryker combat vehicles, special forces, and unmanned systems." "With respect, sir, that's bullshit," Sullivan said, his voice low but intense. "You can't fight wars with only light vehicles and drones. Sooner or later, we'll face a conventional force again, and when that day comes, we'll need tanks and men who know how to use them." Westmoreland sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I don't disagree with you, Jim, but this decision comes from far above my pay grade. The Secretary of Defense has signed off on it, and the President is backing the plan. The 2nd Armored Regiment will be deactivated and its personnel reassigned. I've fought to give you 6 months instead of 3. It's the best I could do." Sullivan closed the folder and placed it back on the desk. The morning light filtering through the window highlighted the photographs on Westmoreland's wall images of the 2 men standing together beside an M1 Abrams in the Saudi desert, covered in dust but triumphant after the 100-hour ground war. "So that's it? 30 years ends with a bureaucratic memo?" Sullivan asked. "Not quite," Westmoreland said, his expression changing subtly. He pressed a button on his phone. "Margaret, please have the others join us now." Sullivan raised an eyebrow. "Others?" The door opened, and a uniformed Air Force officer entered, followed by a serious-looking woman in civilian clothes and a younger Army officer. Westmoreland gestured for them to sit. "Colonel Sullivan, allow me to introduce Lieutenant Colonel Michael Daniels, United States Air Force, formerly Apache helicopter pilot, and now working with weapons guidance systems at Edwards Air Force Base. Dr. Sarah Winters, ballistics and armor specialist with DARPA. And I believe you know Lieutenant Ryan Cooper from your regiment." Sullivan nodded to Cooper, one of his most promising young officers who had distinguished himself during the Iraq invasion. "What's this about, Harold?" Sullivan asked, reverting to Westmoreland's first name, a privilege earned through years of friendship and shared combat. Westmoreland walked to the door, checked the hallway, and closed it firmly. He then went to a panel on the wall and pressed a sequence of buttons. A soft hum indicated that the room's counter-surveillance systems had activated. "What I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest level," Westmoreland said. "2 months ago, one of our intelligence assets provided information on a new main battle tank being developed by our adversaries. The specifications are concerning." He handed each of them another folder, this one with a red border and top-secret markings. Sullivan opened it and felt his stomach tighten as he read the technical details and viewed the grainy reconnaissance photos. The new enemy tank featured a revolutionary armor configuration, a main gun with devastating penetrating power, and an advanced target acquisition system that could track and engage targets beyond the range of American weapons. "We ran simulations last week," Westmoreland continued. "In a hypothetical conflict scenario, this new tank achieved a kill ratio of 7-to-1 against our Abrams, 7 of our tanks destroyed for every one of theirs." Sullivan looked up sharply. "That's impossible. The Abrams is the most formidable tank in the world." "Was," corrected Dr. Winters, speaking for the first time. Her voice was crisp and authoritative. "This new design incorporates several technological breakthroughs we've been tracking, but didn't expect to see deployed for another decade." "The point is," Westmoreland said, "we have a serious problem and no immediate solution. Developing a next-generation tank would take 10 years minimum. We don't have 10 years. Sullivan understood now why he had been summoned. "And what does this have to do with my regiment being deactivated?" Westmoreland looked at him intently. "Officially nothing. The decision to restructure our armored forces stands. Unofficially, we need a stopgap solution, Jim. Something we can deploy within months, not years. Something that can level the playing field until our next-generation systems come online." "You want me to develop a counter to this new tank," Sullivan said. It wasn't a question. "I want you to lead a black program to develop a tank destroyer using existing platforms and technology. Something we can field quickly, at reasonable cost, and with minimal training requirements for crews. You'll have these people as your core team, plus a few others we're bringing in." Sullivan glanced at the others in the room, assessing them with a veteran commander's eye. Daniels had the quiet confidence of a combat pilot who had seen action. Winters looked brilliant but untested in the field. Cooper was solid, a combat veteran from Iraq with a mechanical engineering degree from West Point. "And if I refuse?" Sullivan asked, though he already knew the answer. "Then you proceed with deactivating your regiment as ordered. Retire in 6 months, and we pursue other options," Westmoreland said evenly. "But I know you, Jim. You've spent your life defending this country. This is your chance to make one last contribution, to ensure our forces never enter a fight at a disadvantage." Sullivan was silent for a long moment. The rational part of him recognized this as a fool's errand, a desperate gamble with poor odds of success. But the soldier in him, the man who had led troops into battle and sworn never to leave them vulnerable, could not walk away. "I'll need more people," he said finally. "Good people. And I'll need resources, facilities, and authority to cut through red tape." Westmoreland smiled for the first time that morning. "I thought you might say that. There's a technical sergeant named Robert Thompson stationed at Fort Hood. He's been maintaining Abrams tanks for 25 years. Word is there's nothing about the M1 he doesn't know. And Captain Maria Ramirez at Aberdeen Proving Ground, logistics and procurement specialist. She can get you what you need without raising flags." "What's our timeline?" Sullivan asked. 90 days to proof of concept, 6 months to initial deployment capability." Sullivan almost laughed. "That's impossible." "Perhaps," Westmoreland conceded, "but it's what we have. The facility is ready. Your team will be assembled by tomorrow. The project designation is Wolverine. Official cover story is that you're evaluating equipment for decommissioning." Sullivan stood, his mind already racing with possibilities and obstacles. The challenge was immense, perhaps the greatest of his career. But for the first time in years, he felt truly alive. "One more thing," Westmoreland added as Sullivan reached for the door. "General Richard Hamilton is overseeing the Army's unmanned combat vehicle program. He believes drones are the answer to this threat. He has the Secretary's ear, and he'll view your project as a threat to his funding. Watch your back, Jim." Sullivan nodded grimly. Richard Hamilton was a political general who had spent more time in Washington than in the field. They had clashed before over military doctrine. Now they would be competing directly for the future of American armored warfare. "I always do," Sullivan replied. The facility assigned to Project Wolverine was an abandoned vehicle maintenance depot at the edge of Fort Belvoir, Virginia. The main building was a cavernous structure with high ceilings, overhead cranes, and enough space to work on several vehicles simultaneously. Adjacent buildings housed offices, a small barracks, and secure communications equipment. When Sullivan arrived the following morning, he found Lieutenant Colonel Daniels already there, inspecting the equipment. "Colonel," Daniels said, saluting crisply, "the place is rough, but it has potential. Power systems are solid. The security perimeter needs work." Sullivan returned the salute. "What's your background, Daniels? Westmoreland said you were Apache, but you're working on guidance systems now?" Daniels gestured to his right leg. "Took a round through the cockpit during a dust-off in Afghanistan. Shattered my femur in 3 places. Flight surgeon grounded me permanently. I went back to school, got my master's in electronic warfare systems. Been working on targeting packages for smart munitions ever since." Before Sullivan could respond, a battered pickup truck pulled into the compound. A stocky man in his late 40s climbed out, duffel bag in hand. He wore civilian clothes, but his military bearing was unmistakable. "That'll be Thompson," Sullivan said. "Let's see if he's as good as his reputation." Technical Sergeant Robert "Bobby" Thompson proved to be everything Westmoreland had promised and more. After brief introductions, Sullivan led him to a tarp-covered object in the center of the main bay. When he pulled away the covering, Thompson's eyes lit up at the sight of the partially disassembled M1A2 Abrams. "Beautiful machine," Thompson said, running his hand along the tank's turret. "Best ever built. This one's seen action." "Iraq?" Sullivan was impressed. "Good eye. Second Battle of Fallujah. How can you tell?" Thompson pointed to barely visible marks on the armor. "Pattern of IED damage, very specific to that region and time period. Plus the dust residue in the track assembly has a particular color. You see enough of these, you learn to read them like books." Over the next hour, Thompson demonstrated his encyclopedic knowledge of the Abrams system, discussing potential modifications with a precision that convinced Sullivan he had found the right man for the mechanical aspects of the project. By noon, Dr. Winters and Lieutenant Cooper had arrived, followed shortly by Captain Maria Ramirez, a compact, intense woman whose efficiency became immediately apparent as she began organizing the logistics of their operation. "I've secured an initial equipment allocation under the guise of a decommissioning evaluation," Ramirez reported. 3 Bradley fighting vehicles will be delivered tomorrow. "I've also requisitioned tools, testing equipment, and basic materials. Anything specialized will take longer and require creative paperwork." Sullivan gathered the team in the makeshift conference room, where he had set up presentation boards with the limited information they had on the enemy tank and their own resources. "I'm not going to sugarcoat this," he began. "We've been handed a nearly impossible task. We need to develop a vehicle capable of defeating the most advanced tank in the world, using only the equipment and technology we already have. We have minimal budget, a compressed timeline, and significant political opposition." He pinned up a photograph of the Bradley fighting vehicle. "This is our starting platform. The Bradley is lighter and more mobile than the Abrams, but its 25mm chain gun is useless against modern tank armor." Cooper raised a hand. "Sir, with respect, why not simply upgrade the Abrams, add better armor, improve the targeting system?" "2 reasons, Lieutenant," Sullivan replied. "First, time and money. Significantly modifying the Abrams would take years and billions of dollars, neither of which we have. Second, doctrine. Even our upgraded Abrams would be fighting the enemy's tanks on their terms, direct confrontation. We need to change the paradigm." Dr. Winters spoke up. "You're talking about an asymmetric approach. Don't match them tank for tank, but develop a specialized tank hunter." "Exactly," Sullivan said, appreciating her quick grasp of the concept. "During World War II, the Germans faced a similar problem when they encountered Soviet T-34 and KV tanks. Their existing anti-tank weapons were inadequate. They responded by creating the Martyr series vehicles that sacrificed armor protection for mobility and firepower. The Martyr was a stopgap solution," Thompson noted. "Thin armor, open-topped. Crews were exposed to artillery and small arms fire." "Yes, but they worked," Sullivan countered. "They gave the Germans time to develop better tanks. That's what Wolverine needs to be our Martyr, a stopgap that buys us time." He uncovered another board, this one showing a crude sketch of a modified Bradley with a much larger gun mounted in an open turret. "This is my initial concept. We take the Bradley chassis, remove the standard turret, and install a modified version of the Abrams 120mm main gun. We lose the autoloader to save weight, accept a slower rate of fire, reduce the ammunition capacity, and minimize armor to maintain mobility. The room was silent as the team studied the concept. It was radical, unorthodox, and violated numerous established principles of armored vehicle design. "It's insane," Daniels finally said. Then he grinned. "I love it." "The recoil forces will be tremendous," Thompson warned. "The Bradley chassis was never designed to handle a 120mm cannon. The first shot might be the last before the whole vehicle tears itself apart." "That's why you're here," Sullivan told him, "to solve that problem." "The weight distribution will be completely wrong," Cooper added. "It'll be top-heavy, prone to tipping on rough terrain." "Then we'll lower the profile," Sullivan said. "Redesign the turret, change the gun mounting." For the next 2 hours, they dissected the concept, identifying dozens of technical challenges. Yet gradually, as they worked through the problems, a sense of possibility began to emerge. These were among the best minds in the military technical community, and the challenge appealed to their problem-solving instincts. "We'll need a test-fire facility," Dr. Winters said, making notes, "somewhere remote, where the noise and activity won't attract attention." "I know a place," Sullivan replied. "An abandoned range at Fort Pickett. It's officially closed for environmental remediation, a good cover for our testing." As they continued planning, a military police vehicle approached the compound. The team watched through the windows as a staff car followed, stopping outside the main entrance. A tall, trim general emerged, flanked by aides. "Hamilton," Sullivan muttered. "Sooner than I expected." General Richard Hamilton strode into the conference room without knocking, his face set in a mask of professional cordiality that didn't reach his eyes. At 52, he represented the new generation of military leadership, technocratic, politically savvy, and ambitious. His immaculate uniform bore the Combat Infantry Badge and Bronze Star, but Sullivan knew his combat experience was limited to a brief tour in Panama decades earlier. "Colonel Sullivan," Hamilton said with a thin smile, "I thought I should personally welcome you to your new assignment. When I heard Harold had pulled you from retirement to lead this project, I was intrigued." "I wasn't aware I was slated for retirement, General," Sullivan replied coolly. "Last I checked, I was still commanding the 2nd Armored Regiment." Hamilton waved a hand dismissively. "A formality. We all know heavy armor is on its way out. The future belongs to unmanned systems, precision strike capabilities, and network-centric warfare." He glanced around at the presentation boards, "which makes this project all the more puzzling. Mounting a tank cannon on a Bradley? It's like putting a jet engine on a propeller aircraft. An interesting engineering exercise, perhaps, but hardly a practical military solution." Sullivan kept his expression neutral, though his jaw tightened slightly. "We've been assigned to explore all options, General. Sometimes old ideas can find new applications." Of course," Hamilton said, examining the schematics with exaggerated interest. "Well, I wouldn't want to interfere with your exploration. I just thought you should know that my UCAV program has already demonstrated remarkable anti-armor capabilities. Our latest Hunter drone can deploy 4 Hellfire missiles with over 90% accuracy at ranges beyond 15 kilometers. No crew at risk, precision strike capability, and a unit cost of less than a tenth of a main battle tank." "Impressive," Sullivan acknowledged, "until the enemy deploys basic electronic countermeasures or operates in bad weather, or the data link gets jammed, or civilian casualties become a concern." Hamilton's smile faltered slightly. "The technical challenges are being addressed. The point is, Colonel, that while you're tinkering with your hardware hybrid here, real solutions are already being deployed. Solutions that have the full backing of the Secretary and the Joint Chiefs." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Don't misunderstand me, Sullivan. I respect your service record and your dedication, but I would hate to see you end a distinguished career by attaching yourself to an obsolete concept. There's a place for veterans like you advising, teaching, preserving the lessons of the past. But the future of warfare belongs to a new generation with new ideas." His eyes swept over Daniels, Winters, and the other team members. "Remember that, all of you." After Hamilton departed, a heavy silence hung over the room. Sullivan could see the doubt in his team's eyes, the uncertainty seeded by Hamilton's confident dismissal of their project. "Well," Sullivan said finally, "now we know where we stand." "He's got a point about the drones," Cooper ventured cautiously. "They are effective against armor, with minimal risk to personnel." Sullivan nodded. "They are, until they aren't. Hamilton is betting everything on optimal conditions, perfect intelligence, perfect weather, perfect communications, and an enemy with no countermeasures. War is rarely so accommodating." He walked to the window, watching Hamilton's staff car drive away. Hamilton sees warfare as a technological problem to be solved, but at its core, war remains a human endeavor. Technology changes, human nature doesn't. Fear, courage, desperation, ingenuity, these factors will always matter on the battlefield, no matter how many layers of technology we add. Sullivan turned back to face his team. Our job isn't to win a budget battle with Hamilton. Our job is to give American forces a fighting chance against a superior enemy tank. If his drones can do that job, fantastic. But I'm not willing to bet American lives on that assumption. Are any of you? The question hung in the air momentarily before Thompson broke the silence. I've spent my career keeping tanks running so the men inside them come home. I've patched bullet holes with blood still on the armor. I'm not about to start trusting machines to do a soldier's job. Daniels nodded in agreement. Drones have their place, but they're tools, not solutions. I've seen what happens when comms go down or weather turns. You need humans making decisions in the fight. One by one, the others affirmed their commitment to the project. Sullivan felt a surge of pride. This was why he had stayed in the service long past the point when many of his contemporaries had retired to comfortable consulting jobs or defense contractor positions. This sense of purpose, of service to a cause greater than oneself. Then let's get to work, he said. Thompson, Daniels, I want you to begin disassembling that Abrams turret. We need to understand exactly how much we can strip down while maintaining functionality. Cooper, start calculating weight distributions and center of gravity issues for various configurations. Dr. Winters, focus on armor. We need the minimum effective protection consistent with our weight constraints. As the team dispersed to their assignments, Sullivan remained in the conference room, studying the intelligence photos of the enemy tank. It represented everything modern military technology could achieve: a perfect synthesis of firepower, protection, and mobility. To create an effective counter with limited resources and time seemed nearly impossible. But Sullivan had built his career on achieving the impossible. From leading a surrounded tank platoon to safety in Vietnam to breaking through the Republican Guard's defenses in Iraq, he had repeatedly overcome the odds through a combination of tactical innovation, personal courage, and unwavering leadership. This would be his final battle, not on a distant battlefield against a foreign enemy, but here at home against bureaucracy, technological limitations, and the ticking clock of geopolitical tension. If he succeeded, American soldiers would have a fighting chance against a superior foe. If he failed, those same soldiers might face an unbeatable enemy with inadequate weapons. For Sullivan, there was no choice but to succeed. Failure was not an option he could accept. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of intense activity. The team worked 16-hour days, 7 days a week, driven by Sullivan's relentless pace and the urgency of their mission. 3 Bradley fighting vehicles were delivered and immediately modified, their turrets removed to prepare for the installation of the 120mm gun systems salvaged from decommissioned Abrams tanks. The technical challenges proved even more daunting than initially feared. The Bradley's chassis, designed for a 25mm chain gun, groaned under the weight of the much heavier 120mm cannon. The recoil forces threatened to tear the vehicle apart, and the modified turret disrupted the vehicle's balance to a dangerous degree. We need to completely redesign the suspension, Thompson announced after the first series of static load tests. The standard Bradley configuration can't handle these forces. We're looking at catastrophic failure after just a few shots. Sullivan studied the stress analysis data with a frown. What are our options? We could add reinforcement to the chassis, but that adds weight, which creates new problems. Or we could design a new recoil absorption system specifically for this application. Do both, Sullivan decided. And let's look at modifying the gun itself. Can we reduce the chamber pressure slightly? Trade a bit of penetrating power for less recoil? Dr. Winters, who had been analyzing the enemy tank's armor specifications, shook her head. We're already at the minimum penetration capability needed to defeat their armor at expected engagement ranges. Any reduction would compromise effectiveness. Sullivan rubbed his eyes, feeling the fatigue of endless problem-solving sessions. All right, focus on the chassis reinforcement and recoil system then. The work continued day and night. Each solution seemed to create 2 new problems. Reinforcing the chassis added weight, which strained the engine and reduced mobility. Modifying the gun mounting to better absorb recoil compromised accuracy. Every system in the vehicle needed to be reconsidered, redesigned, and tested under crushing time pressure. By the end of the third week, they had produced a single prototype vehicle that could, in theory, fire the 120mm gun without disintegrating. Whether it could do so accurately or survive multiple firings remained to be seen. "We're ready for live fire testing," Sullivan announced one morning, after reviewing the latest simulation data. "Let's move the prototype to Fort Pickett." The abandoned range at Fort Pickett was perfect for their needs: remote, secluded, and officially closed to regular activities. Captain Ramirez had arranged for the necessary transportation and ensured that their presence would be explained as part of an environmental assessment team, complete with falsified paperwork and appropriate vehicle markings. As they prepared for the first live fire test, Sullivan felt the familiar tension that preceded combat. This wasn't battle, but the stakes felt just as high. The prototype Wolverine, a strange hybrid of Bradley and Abrams components, looked ungainly and improvised because it was. Its turret sat lower than a standard tank, with a reinforced gun mount and specially designed recoil compensators. The vehicle's profile was awkward, neither the sleek lines of the Bradley nor the imposing bulk of the Abrams. "She's ugly," Thompson said, standing beside Sullivan as the vehicle was positioned on the firing line. "But sometimes the ugly ones fight hardest." Sullivan nodded, remembering the many ungainly but effective weapons he had seen over his career. The A-10 Thunderbolt II Warthog was possibly the ugliest aircraft in the inventory, but beloved by ground troops for its devastating close-air support capabilities. Perhaps the Wolverine would follow that tradition: function over form, effectiveness over aesthetics. "Who's taking the first shot?" Cooper asked, joining them. Sullivan had considered this carefully. "I am. If something goes wrong, I'm not risking any of you." "Sir," Cooper protested, "protocol requires—" "I know what protocol requires, Lieutenant," Sullivan cut him off. "But this is my project, my responsibility." Before Cooper could argue further, a staff car approached the range. Sullivan recognized it immediately: General Westmoreland, making an unannounced inspection. This was unexpected and concerning. Even with Westmoreland's support, having high-ranking officers observing their first test only added pressure to an already tense situation. Westmoreland emerged from the vehicle alone, without the usual entourage of aides and assistants. He approached Sullivan with a grim expression. "Jim," he said quietly, "we have a problem. Hamilton has been making noise at the Pentagon. He's convinced several key figures that Wolverine is a waste of resources. There's talk of redirecting your funding to his drone program." Sullivan felt a surge of anger. "We've barely started testing. How can they make that judgment already?" "They can because Hamilton is a better politician than you or I will ever be," Westmoreland replied. "He's painted Wolverine as a dinosaur project run by outdated thinkers resistant to change. The current climate at the Pentagon favors his narrative." "What does that mean for us?" Westmoreland glanced at the prototype vehicle. "It means today matters. A lot. I've convinced the Secretary to give you 1 month to demonstrate a viable prototype. After that, your funding gets redirected unless you can show clear progress." Sullivan absorbed this news with outward calm, though inside he seethed at the political maneuvering. "Then we'd better make this test count." The general looked at the ungainly vehicle with obvious skepticism. "Will it work?" "We're about to find out," Sullivan said. As Westmoreland took position in the observation bunker with the rest of the team, Sullivan climbed into the modified Wolverine. The interior was cramped and improvised, with exposed wiring and temporary control systems. In a production version, these would be refined and properly integrated, but for now, function trumped form. Sullivan settled into the gunner's position, familiarizing himself with the controls. Despite the modifications, the fundamentals remained similar to the Abrams systems he knew so well. Target acquisition, range finding, fire control, these core functions translated across platforms. "Comms check," he said into his headset. "Reading you 5x5, Thompson replied from the bunker. "All monitoring systems are online. We're tracking stress loads across all major structural components." "Roger that, loading test round now." Sullivan loaded the training round into the breech, a process made more difficult by the confined space. In the Abrams, an autoloader handled this task, but they had removed that system to save weight and complexity in the Wolverine. The massive 120mm shell felt reassuringly solid in his hands, a tangible connection to the many battles he had fought with similar weapons. Round loaded, preparing to fire. He aligned the sights on the target, a decommissioned M60 tank, positioned 1,500 meters downrange. In a real engagement, the Wolverine would likely face targets at greater ranges, but this was sufficient for initial testing. Firing in 3, 2, 1, Sullivan squeezed his trigger. For a millisecond, nothing happened. Then the world exploded. The roar was deafening even through his hearing protection. The Wolverine rocked violently backwards, its suspension compressed to the limits by the massive recoil force. Warning lights flashed across the jury-rigged control panel as various systems registered strain beyond normal parameters. But the vehicle held together. The shell streaked downrange and struck the target with devastating accuracy, penetrating the frontal armor of the old M60 as if it were tissue paper. A successful first shot. "Status report," Sullivan called. Hold, already loading a second round. Primary structural integrity is holding, Thompson reported, excitement evident in his voice. Stress readings in the upper chassis are higher than predicted, but within tolerance. Recoil compensators performing at 92% of expected efficiency. Excellent, preparing second shot. Sullivan fired again. This time he was better prepared for the violent recoil. Again, the Wolverine strained but held together. The second shot struck within half a meter of the first, another clean penetration. "Looking good, Colonel," Dr. Winters reported. "Accuracy is well within acceptable parameters." Sullivan prepared a third round, then a fourth. Each shot stressed the vehicle further, but the modifications held. After the fifth shot, he detected a burning smell and noticed hydraulic fluid leaking from the gun mounting. "We've got a breach in the recoil system," he reported. "Hydraulic pressure dropping." "Shut it down," Thompson ordered. "We need to assess the damage before firing again." Sullivan exited the vehicle as the rest of the team emerged from the observation bunker. Their expressions told him everything he needed to know. The test was a qualified success. The concept was viable, even if significant refinement remained necessary. Westmoreland approached, his face thoughtful. 5 shots, 5 hits, and the vehicle's still operational. Better than I expected, to be honest. "We've got a hydraulic leak in the recoil system," Sullivan reported, "and the suspension is taking more strain than we calculated. But the basic concept works. With refinement, this could be a viable platform." "How quickly can you address these issues?" Sullivan looked at Thompson, who had already begun examining the leaking hydraulic system. 2 weeks for the critical fixes, a month to have a fully functional prototype ready for comprehensive testing. Westmoreland nodded. "You've got your month. I'll hold Hamilton at bay for that long. But Jim," he added in a lower voice, "he's not going to stop. He sees your project as a threat to his vision for the future of warfare, and he has powerful allies." "I'm not concerned with Hamilton's politics," Sullivan said firmly. "I'm concerned with giving our soldiers the tools they need to survive on the battlefield." "Noble," Westmoreland acknowledged. "But in Washington, nobility without political awareness is a quick path to irrelevance. Watch your back, Jim. This fight is just beginning." As Westmoreland departed, Sullivan gathered his team around the Wolverine. The vehicle sat smoking slightly, battle-damaged but unbowed, much like Sullivan himself. "Good work, everyone," he told them. "We've proven the concept is viable. Now we refine it, improve it, and make it combat-ready." The team dispersed to begin repairs and analysis, energized by their qualified success. Sullivan remained by the vehicle, running his hand along its improvised armor. The Wolverine was ugly, compromised, and imperfect, a reflection of the messy reality of warfare rather than the clean, theoretical battles fought in Pentagon war rooms and simulation computers. Yet it had worked, against the odds, against the prevailing wisdom, against the political currents. They had created something that could give American forces a fighting chance against a superior enemy. It wasn't elegant or revolutionary, but it was practical and achievable within their brutal constraints. As the sun set over the Virginia countryside, casting long shadows across the firing range, Sullivan allowed himself a moment of cautious optimism. The road ahead remained difficult, the obstacles substantial, but today they had taken the first crucial step. Wolverine had proven itself in fire, the ultimate test for any weapon of war. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new problems to solve, new battles with Hamilton and his political allies. But for now, Sullivan could take satisfaction in what they had accomplished. The old tanker had one more fight left in him, and he intended to win it not for himself, but for the next generation of soldiers who would face unknown enemies on distant battlefields. His phone vibrated with an incoming message. It was from an unknown number, but the content made its source clear. "Initial test successful. Congratulations, but don't celebrate yet. Hamilton has scheduled a demonstration of his drone systems for the secretary next week. He's moving faster than we anticipated. The real battle is just beginning. Sullivan pocketed the phone, his brief moment of satisfaction evaporating. The message only confirmed what he already knew. This wasn't just a technical challenge, but a political one. Hamilton was determined to kill Wolverine before it could threaten his drone program's funding. That night, as the team worked on repairs to the prototype, Sullivan retreated to the small office they had set up in one of the range buildings. Maps and technical diagrams covered the walls, along with photos of the enemy tank they were designing to counter. He opened his laptop and began typing his assessment of the day's test, documenting both the successes and the problems that needed addressing. This was more than routine paperwork. It was ammunition for the bureaucratic battle ahead. Every positive result needed to be highlighted, every issue presented alongside a viable solution. As he worked, Sullivan found his mind drifting to earlier battles, places with names like Fallujah, Basra, Kuwait City, and further back, to the jungles and rice paddies of Vietnam. In each of those conflicts, American forces had eventually prevailed through a combination of superior equipment, training, and leadership. But what happened when the equipment advantage disappeared? His musings were interrupted by a knock at the door. Captain Ramirez entered, carrying a tablet computer. "Sir, I've been monitoring communications from the Pentagon," she said without preamble. "Hamilton has accelerated his timeline. His drone demonstration isn't next week, it's in 3 days." Sullivan frowned. "That doesn't give us time to prepare a counter-demonstration." "I don't think that's coincidental, sir," Ramirez replied dryly. "Of course not. What else?" Ramirez hesitated. "There's something else you should see." She handed him the tablet, which displayed an internal Pentagon memo. This was distributed to senior staff this morning. The memo outlined a proposed reorganization of defense procurement priorities, with substantial funding increases for unmanned systems and corresponding cuts to conventional armored vehicle programs. Buried in the technical language was a specific reference to experimental hybrid vehicles being deprioritized in favor of proven unmanned technology solutions. "He's not even waiting for the demonstration," Sullivan said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "He's already moving to cut our funding." "Yes, sir, but there's more." Ramirez swiped to another document. "This is the attendee list for Hamilton's demonstration. In addition to the secretary, there will be representatives from the appropriations committees of both the House and Senate, plus several key defense contractors." Sullivan understood immediately. Hamilton wasn't just showing off his technology, he was building a political coalition to support it. Defense contractors meant jobs in congressional districts. Appropriations committee members controlled the defense budget. This was a sophisticated political operation, not just a technology demonstration. "How did you get these documents?" Sullivan asked. Ramirez gave a small smile. "I have friends in the right places. My father was a supply sergeant in Vietnam. He taught me that in the military, logistics people know everything because everything has to move through their hands." Sullivan studied the documents again, his tactical mind already formulating a response. "We need to be at that demonstration." "Sir?" Ramirez looked surprised. "We haven't been invited." "Then we'll invite ourselves. Contact Westmoreland. Tell him we need to be there as part of a comprehensive assessment of anti-armor capabilities. Use whatever bureaucratic language you need, but make it happen." "Yes, sir, and if that doesn't work?" Sullivan's expression hardened. "Then we'll crash the party. I didn't spend 30 years in the Army to be sidelined by a political general with no combat experience." Ramirez nodded, a new respect evident in her eyes. "I'll make it happen, sir." After she left, Sullivan returned to his assessment report with renewed purpose. Hamilton might have the political advantages, but Sullivan had something perhaps more valuable: decades of combat experience and the hard-earned wisdom that came with it. He had faced long odds before, against enemies far more deadly than an ambitious general. The next morning, Sullivan called the team together for a strategy session. They gathered in the makeshift conference room, tired from the long night of repairs, but energized by the previous day's qualified success. "We need to accelerate our timeline," Sullivan announced. "Hamilton is moving faster than anticipated. His drone demonstration is in 3 days, and he's already laying the political groundwork to terminate our funding." 3 days isn't enough time to address all the issues we identified," Thompson objected. "The hydraulic system alone will take at least a week to properly redesign." "I'm aware," Sullivan replied, "but we need to show progress, sufficient progress to keep our funding intact." Captain Ramirez is working to get us included in Hamilton's demonstration. If she succeeds, we need something to show. De Winters frowned. What exactly are you suggesting, Colonel? We can't risk another live fire test until the critical systems are repaired. The risk of catastrophic failure is too high. I'm not suggesting we fire the gun, Sullivan clarified, but we can demonstrate mobility, targeting systems, and our overall concept. We need to show that Wolverine offers capabilities that drones cannot provide. Daniels, who had been quiet until now, leaned forward. What specific advantages does Wolverine have over Hamilton's drones? We need to be clear about that message. Sullivan moved to the whiteboard and began writing. First, resilience. Drones require continuous data links that can be jammed or disrupted. Wolverine functions autonomously with human operators making decisions in the field. Second, weather independence. Hamilton's drones use optical and infrared targeting that can be degraded by adverse weather conditions. Third, psychological impact. Tanks and tank destroyers have a psychological effect on both enemy forces and friendly infantry that drones flying at 20,000 feet cannot match. Cooper added, and cost. A single drone might be cheaper than a tank, but the entire system's satellites, ground stations, secure data links is enormously expensive and vulnerable. Good point, Sullivan agreed, adding it to the list. Finally, there's the human factor. A well-trained tank crew can make battlefield decisions that no algorithm can replicate, assessing terrain, identifying the most threatening targets, coordinating with infantry, adapting to unexpected situations. Hamilton's vision removes humans from the battlefield entirely, which sounds good until the enemy does something unexpected. The team spent the next hour refining their message and developing a demonstration plan that would highlight Wolverine's advantages without requiring a live fire test. By the end, they had a clear strategy. Focus on Wolverine's role as a complement to unmanned systems, not a replacement for them. We're not anti-technology, Sullivan emphasized. We're proposing a balanced approach that leverages both human judgment and advanced systems. Hamilton is the one presenting a false choice between his drones and conventional armor. Our message is that both have roles to play. As they dispersed to their tasks, Sullivan felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was more than a technical challenge now. It was a battle for the future of American military doctrine. Hamilton represented a vision of warfare that removed human judgment from the battlefield, replacing it with algorithms and remote operators. Sullivan believed in embracing technology while keeping humans at the center of combat decisions. The stakes were personal for Sullivan, but they were also much larger than his own career or legacy. The choices made in the coming weeks would shape how America fought its wars for decades to come. If Hamilton prevailed, America's enemies would face swarms of remote-controlled weapons guided by artificial intelligence. If Sullivan's vision won out, they would face an integrated force of human operators and advanced systems, combining the best of both worlds. That evening, Ramirez returned with news. "We're in, sir. General Westmoreland pulled some strings. We've been added to the demonstration schedule immediately following Hamilton's presentation." Sullivan nodded, satisfied. "Good work, Captain. What's our time slot?" 30 minutes, sir, and—" She hesitated. "It's at the end of the day, after the main demonstration and lunch with the contractors." Sullivan understood what this meant. They were an afterthought, scheduled when attendees would be tired, distracted, and already forming their conclusions. Another political maneuver by Hamilton. "It doesn't matter," he said firmly. "We'll make those 30 minutes count." The next 2 days passed in a blur of frantic activity. The team worked around the clock to prepare both the vehicle and their presentation. The hydraulic system was temporarily patched, not a permanent solution, but sufficient for a mobility demonstration. The targeting system was refined, drawing on Daniels' expertise with Apache attack helicopters. On the morning of the demonstration, they transported the Wolverine to Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland, where Hamilton's event was being held. The vehicle looked better than it had during the initial tests, still ungainly, but with a more finished appearance. They had added provisional armor plates and painted it in standard Army camouflage, giving it at least the appearance of a proper military vehicle rather than a workshop experiment. As they arrived at the demonstration area, Sullivan saw that Hamilton had spared no expense. A large viewing stand had been erected for the VIPs, complete with a weather canopy and refreshment area. Huge video screens displayed the General Hamilton's insignia alongside images of his Hunter drone system. In the distance, Sullivan could see the drones themselves, small, lethal-looking aircraft armed with multiple missiles. "Quite a show," Thompson muttered, as they parked the Wolverine in the designated staging area. "Bet this cost more than our entire month's budget." Sullivan nodded grimly. "That's the point. We're fighting different battles. Hamilton is selling a vision. We're building a vehicle." They watched as the dignitaries arrived: the Secretary of Defense, members of Congress, generals and admirals, defense contractor executives. Hamilton greeted them personally, every inch the polished, modern military leader. His uniform was immaculate, his manner confident and engaging. As the demonstration began, Sullivan and his team observed from their staging area. Hamilton's presentation was slick and impressive. The drones performed flawlessly, identifying and destroying target vehicles at ranges exceeding 20 kilometers. The video screens showed close-up views of the strikes, the missiles unerringly finding their marks. The dignitaries applauded each successful engagement. "They're using ideal conditions," Daniels observed quietly. "Clear weather, no electronic countermeasures, stationary targets. It's a shooting gallery, not a realistic combat scenario." Sullivan agreed, but he had to admit the demonstration was effective. Hamilton was selling certainty and safety, American forces engaging the enemy from safe distances, with precision weapons that minimized both U.S. casualties and collateral damage. It was a compelling vision, especially to politicians and defense officials who had never experienced the case and complexity of actual combat. After the drone demonstration concluded, the attendees were escorted to a nearby tent for lunch and discussions with the contractors. Sullivan used this time to make final preparations for their own presentation. He gathered his team for a last review. "Remember, we're not just demonstrating a vehicle, we're presenting an alternative vision of warfare," he told them. "Hamilton is selling a fantasy of clean, remote combat. We need to remind them of reality, that wars are fought by human beings making difficult decisions in chaotic conditions. Wolverine represents a balanced technology enhancing human capabilities, not replacing human judgment." When their time slot finally arrived, many of the attendees had already left, and those who remained looked tired and ready to conclude the day. The Secretary remained, along with General Westmoreland and a few key congressional representatives. Hamilton stood to one side, his expression one of polite indifference. Sullivan took the podium while his team positioned the Wolverine for demonstration. "Good afternoon," he began. "I'm Colonel James Sullivan, and I'm here to present Project Wolverine, a rapid development initiative to counter advanced enemy armor threats." He proceeded with a concise overview of the threat posed by the new enemy tank and the Wolverine concept. Unlike Hamilton's polished multimedia presentation, Sullivan relied on his natural authority and decades of combat experience to convey his message. He spoke with the quiet confidence of a man who had led troops in battle, who had made life or death decisions under fire. "The future of warfare will not be fought exclusively by remote systems," he told them. "Our adversaries are developing technologies specifically designed to counter our advantages in network-centric warfare, jamming systems, electronic warfare, and low-tech solutions to high-tech problems. Wolverine represents a complementary capability, ensuring our forces can fight and win even when the networks go down and the drones can't fly." As he spoke, the Wolverine performed a series of maneuvers demonstrating its mobility and targeting capabilities. Thompson had done remarkable work patching the hydraulic system, and the vehicle moved with surprising agility for such an improvised platform. Daniels controlled the targeting system, quickly acquiring and locking onto various targets around the range. "What we're showing today is not a finished system," Sullivan acknowledged. "It's a proof of concept, developed in less than a month with minimal resources. But it demonstrates what's possible when we combine existing technology in innovative ways." He could see that some of the attendees were genuinely interested, particularly the congressional representatives whose districts included manufacturing facilities that could potentially produce the Wolverine. The Secretary remained impassive, though he watched the demonstration attentively. As Sullivan concluded, he made his final point directly. "General Hamilton has shown you an impressive vision of future warfare, and there's no doubt that unmanned systems will play a crucial role. But Wolverine represents a different philosophy, that human judgment remains essential on the battlefield, and that we need multiple tools to address diverse threats. I'm not asking you to choose between drones and armored vehicles. I'm suggesting we need both, working in concert to ensure American forces never face a superior enemy without the tools they need to win." There was polite applause as Sullivan stepped away from the podium. Hamilton immediately moved in, shaking hands with the secretary and guiding him toward the exit. The demonstration was over, but Sullivan could not tell whether they had made a sufficient impact to save their program. As the attendees departed, Westmoreland approached Sullivan. "Good presentation, Jim. Straightforward, honest, effective." "But was it enough?" Sullivan asked bluntly. Westmoreland glanced toward the departing secretary. "Hard to say. Hamilton's drone show was impressive, and he's been laying the groundwork for months while we've had days." He placed a hand on Sullivan's shoulder. "The decision won't come today. You've given them something to think about. That's all we could hope for. What's next? Go back to your facility. Continue development. I'll fight for your funding at the Pentagon, but be prepared for constraints. Hamilton has powerful allies." As Westmoreland departed, Sullivan gathered his team around the Wolverine. Despite the uncertainty of their future, he felt a sense of pride in what they had accomplished in such a short time. They had taken an impossible challenge and created a viable concept, demonstrating American ingenuity and determination at its best. "Did we do enough?" Cooper asked, voicing the question on everyone's mind. Sullivan looked at each of them and turned to Thompson, the veteran mechanic who could make machines perform beyond their design specifications. Daniels, the wounded pilot who had channeled his expertise into new targeting systems. Winters, the brilliant scientist who had found ways to maximize protection with minimal weight. Cooper, the young officer bridging the gap between generations. And Ramirez, the logistics wizard who made the impossible possible. "We did our best," Sullivan told them. "And we're not finished. This was just the first round. We've proven the concept works. Now we refine it, improve it, and make it combat ready. Politics will take care of itself." As they loaded the Wolverine for transport back to their facility, Sullivan caught sight of Hamilton watching them from a distance. The general's expression was unreadable, but there was an intensity in his gaze that suggested he viewed Wolverine as more than just a competing program. For Hamilton, this was a battle for the future of warfare itself, with profound implications for his vision and legacy. Sullivan met his gaze steadily, a silent acknowledgement passing between the two men. They were both patriots, both dedicated to America's defense, but with fundamentally different visions of how wars should be fought. Only one vision would prevail, and neither man intended to concede. The battle for Wolverine had just begun, and Sullivan was prepared to fight it to the end, not for himself, but for the next generation of soldiers who would face unknown enemies on distant battlefields. The stakes were too high to do anything less. The morning after the demonstration, Sullivan arrived at the Wolverine facility to find his team already hard at work. Despite the uncertain reception at Aberdeen, they had returned energized rather than defeated. Thompson was elbow-deep in the Wolverine's hydraulic system, making permanent repairs to the temporary fixes that had gotten them through the demonstration. Daniels and Dr. Winters huddled over computer simulations, refining the targeting system based on data collected during their presentation. Cooper and Ramirez were nowhere to be seen, presumably pursuing their own tasks elsewhere. Sullivan allowed himself a moment of pride. This was how soldiers responded to adversity, not with despair, but with redoubled effort. Hamilton might have the political advantages, but Sullivan had assembled a team with the grit and determination that had characterized American fighting forces throughout history. His phone vibrated with an incoming call. The screen displayed Westmoreland's name. "Sullivan here," he answered. "Jim, it's Harold. We need to talk. Not on the phone. Can you come to my office at 1400 hours? The formality and brevity of the request told Sullivan everything he needed to know. Bad news was coming. "I'll be there," Sullivan replied. When he arrived at the Pentagon that afternoon, Sullivan found Westmoreland standing at the window of his office, hands clasped behind his back, staring out at the Potomac River. The general turned as Sullivan entered, his expression grave. "The secretary made his decision this morning," Westmoreland said without preamble. "Project Wolverine's funding has been reduced by 60%, effective immediately. The remaining funds will support completion of a single prototype for evaluation, but no production planning or additional development." Sullivan absorbed this blow stoically, his face betraying no emotion. And Hamilton's drone program received a 30% budget increase with accelerated deployment timelines. Sullivan nodded slowly, processing the implications. The decision wasn't a complete termination, but the message was clear: Wolverine was being set up to fail. With inadequate resources, they couldn't possibly address all the technical challenges in time to impress during the final evaluation. What's the timeline for the evaluation? Sullivan asked. 30 days. The secretary wants to see a fully functional prototype in a comparative demonstration against Hamilton's Hunter drones. If Wolverine performs adequately, there's a possibility of reconsidering the funding decision. 30 days with reduced funding, Sullivan repeated. They've made their decision before the test even happens. Westmoreland didn't deny it. Politics, Jim. Hamilton has powerful allies and a compelling narrative. Drones mean no American casualties, precise strikes, minimal collateral damage. It's what elected officials want to hear. Until the drones fail in actual combat conditions, Sullivan countered, then those same officials will demand to know why our forces didn't have alternative capabilities. I don't disagree with you, Westmoreland said, returning to his desk. But the reality is we need to work within the constraints we've been given. Can you deliver a functional prototype in 30 days with the reduced funding? Sullivan considered the challenge. With 60% less money, they would need to cut corners, focus only on the most critical systems, and likely work without pay beyond their normal duties. It would require sacrifice from every team member. We'll deliver, Sullivan said with quiet determination, even if I have to fund the damn thing myself. Westmoreland managed a tight smile. I thought you might say that. I've arranged for some additional support through unofficial channels. Captain Ramirez will find certain requisition forms mysteriously pre-approved. Don't ask questions about where the parts come from. Sullivan nodded in appreciation. It wasn't the first time military necessity had required creative interpretations of supply regulations. One more thing, Westmoreland added, his expression darkening. Watch Hamilton closely. My sources tell me he was furious that you were allowed to present at Aberdeen at all. He views Wolverine as a direct threat to his program, not just a competing concept, but a repudiation of his entire philosophy of warfare. He won't be content with merely winning the budget battle. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that accidents happen, especially with experimental military hardware developed under tight deadlines. Westmoreland pitted carefully. Be vigilant, Jim. Sullivan left the Pentagon with a renewed sense of urgency and concern. The budget cut was a serious blow, but not insurmountable. What troubled him more was the implication that Hamilton might take direct action against their project. Sullivan had faced enemy forces in 3 wars, but the idea of sabotage from within his own military felt more disturbing than any external threat. When he returned to the Wolverine facility, Sullivan called the team together to share the news. They absorbed the funding cut with stoic professionalism, though Thompson let out a colorful string of expletives that summed up the collective sentiment. So we got 30 days and less than half our budget to create a miracle, Daniel summarized. Sounds like every combat deployment I've ever been on. We focus on essentials, Sullivan said. The hydraulic system has to work flawlessly. We can't risk another leak during demonstration. The targeting system needs to match or exceed the accuracy of Hamilton's drones. And we need to address the weight distribution issues to improve mobility in varied terrain. What about the armor package? Dr. Winters asked. We've barely begun development of the composite panels. Sullivan made a difficult decision. Armor becomes secondary. In a real deployment, protection would be critical. But for the demonstration, firepower and mobility take priority. We can simulate armor effects for now. The team dispersed to adjust their plans based on the new constraints. Sullivan remained in the conference room, staring at the schematics of the Wolverine pinned to the wall. They had created something remarkable in a short time, but now faced even greater challenges with fewer resources. His contemplation was interrupted when Captain Ramirez entered, carrying a tablet computer and looking troubled. Sir, we may have a problem, she said. I've been reviewing the supply manifest for our critical components, and something doesn't add up. What kind of discrepancy? Sullivan asked. The specialized hydraulic valves we ordered for the recoil system, they were logged as delivered last week. But Thompson says they never arrived. And the requisition for the high tensile steel components shows as indefinitely delayed, despite having priority clearance. Sullivan recalled Westmoreland's warning. Could be a clerical error. One error maybe, Ramirez replied, but I've found 7 critical components that have either disappeared or been mysteriously delayed. That's not coincidence, sir. Sullivan felt a chill of realization. Hamilton, I can't prove it, Ramirez said cautiously, but someone with high-level access is interfering with our supply chain. Can we work around it? Ramirez hesitated. Some items, yes. I can source alternatives through unofficial channels, but the specialized components for the fire control system, there aren't substitutes readily available. Sullivan considered their options. Direct confrontation with Hamilton would be futile without proof and would only waste precious time. They needed a different approach. Find a back channel, Sullivan instructed. Someone at Aberdeen or Fort Knox who can quietly divert what we need from existing inventory. Use my name if necessary, but keep it off the books. That's skirting awfully close to misappropriation of military property, sir, Ramirez said, though her tone suggested she was already considering how to accomplish it. This isn't about regulations, Captain. It's about national security. If Hamilton succeeds in killing Wolverine and his drones fail in combat, American soldiers will die. I'll face a court-martial before I let that happen. Ramirez nodded, her resolve strengthening. Understood, sir. I'll make it happen. As the days passed, the Wolverine team fell into a grueling routine. 16-hour workdays became the norm, with most of the team sleeping on cots in the facility rather than returning to their homes. The budget constraints forced them to improvise, scavenging parts from decommissioned vehicles and adapting commercial components for military applications. The hydraulic system proved particularly challenging. Thompson worked tirelessly to redesign it, muttering curses as he repeatedly dismantled and reassembled the complex array of valves, cylinders, and pressure lines. The fundamental problem is weight distribution, he explained during one late-night session. The 120mm gun creates recoil forces that the Bradley chassis was never designed to handle. We can strengthen the mounting points and improve the hydraulics, but we're still asking this vehicle to do something it wasn't built for. Sullivan watched as Thompson sketched modifications on a grease-stained notepad. Can it be done? Theoretically, yes, Thompson replied, but we're pushing the physical limits of these materials. One weak point, one stress fracture, and the whole system could catastrophically fail. What do you need? Thompson ran a hand through his thinning hair. Time. More time than we have. Or, he hesitated, there might be another approach. I'm listening. Instead of trying to completely absorb the recoil, we could design the system to channel it. Let the entire vehicle rock back slightly with each shot, converting some of the energy into motion, rather than trying to contain it all in the hydraulics. Sullivan considered this. Would that affect accuracy? It would, but Daniels thinks he can compensate with the targeting system. It's unorthodox, but then again, so is this entire project. Sullivan nodded. Do it, and get Daniels to start working on the targeting adjustments immediately. While Thompson and Daniels focused on the firing mechanism, Dr. Winters pursued an innovative approach to the armor challenge. With insufficient funds for advanced composite materials, she began experimenting with layered arrangements of standard steel plating combined with ceramic inserts salvaged from damaged body armor. It won't stop a direct hit from a modern tank round, she acknowledged, but it could provide protection against lesser threats while minimizing weight. Sullivan approved her approach, recognizing that in actual combat, Wolverine would rely more on mobility and concealment than armor. The vehicle was designed to hit and move, not to engage in frontal duels with main battle tanks. By the end of the second week, they had reconstructed the Wolverine with the improved hydraulic system and targeting modifications. The vehicle looked more refined now, less like a hastily assembled prototype, and more like a purpose-built fighting machine. Its low profile and angular surfaces gave it a predatory appearance that suited its name. Sullivan scheduled a live fire test at Fort Pickett, eager to see if Thompson's modifications to the recoil system would solve their biggest technical challenge. The team transported the Wolverine to the range under the cover of darkness, maintaining the secrecy that had surrounded the project from the beginning. As dawn broke over the Virginia countryside, Sullivan climbed into the commander's position inside the Wolverine. Thompson had installed a proper three-person configuration with positions for a commander, gunner, and driver, though for this test, Sullivan would serve as both commander and gunner. Communications check, Sullivan said into his headset. Reading you 5x5, Cooper replied from the observation bunker. Monitoring systems online and recording. Beginning test sequence, Sullivan announced. Loading first round. He loaded the 120mm shell into the breech. The familiar weight and heft of the ammunition, bringing back memories of countless training exercises and combat operations in the Abrams. Despite its improvised nature, the Wolverine's fire control system incorporated many elements from the Abrams, making it intuitive for experienced tank crews. Target is the decommissioned M60 at bearing 095, range 2,000 meters, Sullivan reported. Firing in 3, 2, 1. He squeezed the trigger. The Wolverine erupted with a thunderous roar. the massive 120-meter gun belching flame and smoke. As Thompson had designed, the entire vehicle rocked backwards slightly, absorbing some of the recoil energy through motion rather than containing it entirely in the hydraulic system. Through the gunner's sight, Sullivan watched as the shell streaked toward the target, striking the M60 squarely in the turret and penetrating its armor with devastating effect. Had it been an active enemy tank, the crew would have been killed instantly. Direct hit, Cooper confirmed from the observation post. Hydraulic pressure readings within acceptable parameters. No signs of stress fractures or leakage. Sullivan allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Thompson's unorthodox solution appeared to be working. He loaded a second round, then a third. Each shot landed accurately on target, and the hydraulic system continued to perform without failure. After the fifth shot, Sullivan announced, transitioning to rapid fire test. This was the critical evaluation. In combat, Wolverine might need to fire several rounds in quick succession to engage multiple targets, or to ensure destruction of a particularly hardened enemy vehicle. Sullivan loaded and fired 3 rounds in less than 30 seconds, pushing the hydraulic system to its limits. The Wolverine performed admirably, its modified systems handling the stress without failure. When Sullivan emerged from the vehicle after completing the test sequence, he found the team gathered around Thompson, slapping him on the back in congratulation. "It worked," Thompson said, grinning beneath his grease-stained features. "The crazy bastard actually worked." "Outstanding job," Sullivan told him. "All of you. We still have challenges ahead, but this is a major breakthrough." The team's celebration was short-lived. As they began to pack up their equipment, a military police vehicle approached the range, followed by a staff car bearing Pentagon markings. Sullivan felt a sense of foreboding as he recognized the passenger, General Hamilton. The MP vehicle stopped at the perimeter while Hamilton's car continued forward, dust billowing behind it. The general emerged, immaculate as always in his service uniform, surveying the scene with evident disapproval. "Colonel Sullivan," Hamilton said coldly, "conducting unauthorized weapons tests on a supposedly closed range. I'm disappointed but not surprised." Sullivan maintained his composure. "There's nothing unauthorized about our presence here, General. We have proper clearances for all testing activities." Hamilton smiled thinly. "Clearances arranged through General Westmoreland's office, no doubt. Unfortunately, as of yesterday, all weapons testing must be approved through the Joint Advanced Weapons Committee, which reports directly to me." He handed Sullivan an official-looking document. "This range is now closed pending environmental review. Your equipment will be impounded for safety inspection, and all testing activities are suspended indefinitely." Sullivan scanned the document, recognizing it as a transparent attempt to further delay and undermine the Wolverine project. With just over 2 weeks remaining before the final evaluation, this shutdown could prove fatal to their chances. "This is baseless interference," Sullivan said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "It's proper procedure," Hamilton countered smoothly. "Safety must be our paramount concern, especially with experimental vehicles created under rushed conditions. My responsibility is to ensure that taxpayer funds are not wasted on potentially dangerous prototypes when proven alternatives already exist." Sullivan knew that direct confrontation would only make things worse. Hamilton clearly wanted to provoke an outburst that could be used against him in the project. "We'll comply with the review," Sullivan said finally, "but I'll be filing a formal protest with the Secretary's office. This is transparent obstruction, General, and it compromises national security interests." Hamilton's smile never wavered. "File whatever you wish, Colonel. In the meantime, these MPs will escort your team from the range and secure the vehicle. My technical staff will conduct a thorough safety evaluation before any further testing can be authorized." With that, Hamilton returned to his staff car, leaving Sullivan and his team to watch helplessly as the military police began to cordon off the area. The Wolverine sat on the firing line, suddenly vulnerable to whatever inspection Hamilton's people might conduct. Ramirez approached Sullivan, speaking quietly. "Sir, if they impound the vehicle, we lose any chance of making the demonstration deadline. And who knows what they might do to it during inspection." Sullivan nodded grimly. "Get the team back to our facility immediately. I need to make some calls." While the MPs were distracted setting up their perimeter, Sullivan approached the Wolverine one last time, making a show of collecting personal items from the vehicle. As he leaned into the commander's hatch, he quickly removed several key components from the fire control system and the engine's electronic control module. Without these, the Wolverine could not be operated or properly evaluated. He slipped the components into his jacket and rejoined his team. If Hamilton wanted to inspect their vehicle, he would find it mysteriously inoperable. It wasn't a solution, but it would buy them time. Back at the Wolverine facility, Sullivan immediately called Westmoreland, only to learn that the general was unavailable in meetings with the Joint Chiefs. He left an urgent message and gathered the team to assess their situation. "We've got 15 days until the final evaluation," Sullivan told them. "Hamilton has effectively confiscated our prototype and shut down our testing capability. We need options, people." Daniel spoke first. "Could we build a second prototype? We've refined the design, learned from our mistakes. A new vehicle might actually be better than the original." "With what resources?" Thompson objected. "We're already operating on a shoestring budget. Building a complete second vehicle would require materials and components we don't have and can't requisition without raising flags." "What about alternative testing facilities?" Cooper suggested. "There must be other ranges we could use, perhaps through unofficial channels." Sullivan considered this possibility. "It would have to be completely off the books. Hamilton will be watching all official military ranges." Ramirez had been quiet, her expression thoughtful. Now she leaned forward. "Sir, I might have a solution. My uncle owns a large ranch in West Virginia, over 5,000 acres. Very remote, very private. He was Army, served in Vietnam. If I asked him, he'd let us use a section of his property for testing." "Is there enough open space for long-range fire?" Sullivan asked. "Yes, sir. The property includes several valleys with clear lines of sight up to 3 kilometers. It's not an official range, but it would serve our purposes. And transportation? We'd need to move equipment, ammunition, the vehicle itself, assuming we can recover it from Hamilton's people." Ramirez smiled confidently. "Leave the logistics to me, sir. That's my specialty." Sullivan nodded, a plan beginning to form in his mind. "All right, but first we need to get our prototype back. I removed the critical electronics, but the vehicle itself remains under MP control." "So we're going to steal our own tank," Thompson said, not entirely disapproving. "Not steal," Sullivan corrected. "Legally, that vehicle belongs to this project, assigned by proper military authority. We're simply reclaiming it from improper confiscation." "Semantics aside," Dr. Winters interjected, "how exactly do we reclaim a military vehicle from an MP-controlled range?" Sullivan looked at his team, seeing the determination in their eyes despite the apparent impossibility of their situation. These were problem solvers, people who had spent their careers overcoming obstacles and finding ways to accomplish the mission despite constraints. "We go back to basics," Sullivan said. "When conventional tactics fail, we improvise." Over the next 24 hours, they developed a plan to recover the Wolverine. Sullivan used his remaining connections at the Pentagon to learn that Hamilton's technical team would be conducting their inspection the following night, using the cover of darkness to conceal their activities from potential observers. This created both a challenge and an opportunity. The team gathered in the pre-dawn hours, reviewing the final details of their operation. They were dressed in nondescript clothing, nothing that would identify them as military personnel if they were spotted. "Remember," Sullivan instructed, "this is a recovery operation, not a combat mission. No weapons, no confrontation. If we're compromised, we abort immediately. I'm not risking anyone's career or freedom over this." Thompson raised a hand. "With respect, sir, we're all adults here. We know the risks and we've made our choices. This is bigger than any one of us." The others nodded in agreement, a moment of solemn unity before they departed in separate vehicles, taking different routes to Fort Pickett to avoid drawing attention. Sullivan traveled with Cooper, using the time to prepare the lieutenant for his role in the operation. "You're the newest member of this team," Sullivan said as they drove through the Virginia countryside. "You have the most to lose if this goes badly. Are you certain you want to participate?" Cooper kept his eyes on the road, his profile illuminated by the dashboard lights. "Sir, I signed up to serve my country, not to play politics. If Hamilton succeeds in killing this project, and American tanks get destroyed in the next conflict because we don't have an effective counter to the enemy's capabilities, how could I live with myself?" Sullivan nodded, understanding completely. It was the same calculus that drove him the certainty that what they were doing, while technically against regulations, served a higher purpose in protecting American lives. They arrived at their staging area, an abandoned gas station 3 miles from the Fort Pickett range, shortly after midnight. The rest of the team arrived in staggered intervals, gathering in the dilapidated building to make final preparations. Ramirez provided an update on the situation at the range. Hamilton's team arrived an hour ago, 4 technicians with a portable generator and equipment cases. The MPs are maintaining a perimeter, but it's minimal, just 2 personnel at the main access point, with periodic patrols around the boundary. Do we know what they're doing to our vehicle? Thompson asked. Not specifically, but my source indicates they're conducting a thorough evaluation, which likely includes partial disassembly of critical systems. Sullivan processed this information. So they're doing exactly what we feared, stripping down the Wolverine to delay or prevent our progress. There's more, Ramirez added. A flatbed transport vehicle is scheduled to arrive at Barrow 600 to move the Wolverine to Aberdeen Proving Ground for comprehensive safety evaluation. Once it leaves Fort Pickett, recovery becomes exponentially more difficult. Sullivan checked his watch. Then we have less than 5 hours to execute. Let's move. Their plan was simple in concept, but complex in execution. Ramirez would create a diversion at the opposite end of the range from where the Wolverine was positioned, drawing away the MPs and security personnel. Meanwhile, Sullivan, Thompson, and Cooper would approach the vehicle, reinstall the critical components Sullivan had removed, and drive it off the range using a pre-scouted route that avoided the main access points. Dr. Winters and Daniels would wait at a secondary location with the transport vehicle Ramirez had secured, ready to move the Wolverine to the West Virginia property where they could continue testing away from Hamilton's interference. The team moved out, using night vision equipment borrowed from Cooper's former unit to navigate the darkened terrain. They approached the range boundary where Ramirez had identified a gap in the perimeter security, slipping through undetected. Sullivan led the way, moving with the quiet confidence of a veteran who had conducted countless night operations in far more dangerous environments than this. Cooper followed, with Thompson bringing up the rear, carrying a backpack containing the tools they would need to reinstall the electronic components. They reached a position with clear observation of the Wolverine, now illuminated by portable lights as Hamilton's technicians worked on its exposed systems. Sullivan counted 4 personnel, just as Ramirez had reported, all focused intently on their tasks. Right on schedule, Sullivan whispered, checking his watch. Ramirez should initiate the diversion in 3 minutes. They waited in tense silence. Precisely on time, a series of loud explosions erupted from the far end of the range, followed by brilliant flashes of light. Ramirez had rigged a series of simple but effective distractions using commercial fireworks in fuel containers carefully positioned to create maximum noise and visual impact without causing actual damage. The reaction was immediate. 2 of the technicians immediately ran toward the disturbance, while the others hesitated, looking to each other for guidance. After a brief discussion, they too departed, leaving the Wolverine temporarily unattended as they investigated the commotion. Now, Sullivan ordered, and the 3 men sprinted toward the vehicle, covering the open ground in seconds. Thompson immediately began examining the Wolverine, assessing what Hamilton's team had done. They've started disassembly of the fire control system and removed sections of the hydraulic lines, he reported grimly. But the engine and drivetrain appear intact. How long to get it operational? Sullivan asked. 10 minutes, maybe 15, depends on how much they've compromised. You've got 5, Sullivan told him. Cooper and I will stand watch. Thompson nodded and set to work with the focused intensity of a man who had spent decades maintaining complex machinery under pressure. His hands moved with practiced precision, reinstalling the components Sullivan had removed and quickly reconnecting the systems Hamilton's team had begun to dismantle. Sullivan and Cooper took positions at either end of the vehicle, watching for the return of the technicians or MP patrols. In the distance, Ramirez's diversionary fires continued to burn, drawing attention away from their position. 4 minutes, Sullivan called quietly. Thompson grunted in acknowledgement. His upper body disappeared into the Wolverine's open hatch as he worked on the final connections. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool night air, a testament to the pressure and physical exertion of his task. Almost there, he muttered. Just need to bypass the secondary ignition circuit they've partially disassembled. Suddenly, Cooper hissed a warning. Movement, north perimeter, vehicles approaching. Sullivan looked in the indicated direction and saw headlights bouncing along the access road. How much longer, Thompson? Done, Thompson announced, extracting himself from the hatch. She's not pretty, but she'll run. Mount up, Sullivan ordered. Cooper, you're driving. Thompson, take the gunner's position. I'll command. They scrambled into the Wolverine as the approaching vehicles drew closer. Cooper activated the starting sequence, and the vehicle's engine roared to life, louder than normal due to the compromised exhaust system. Go, 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 Sullivan commanded. Cooper engaged the drive system and the Wolverine lurched forward, quickly gaining speed as it headed toward their pre-planned escape route. Behind them, shouts of alarm could be heard as the returning technicians discovered their vehicle in motion. "We've been spotted," Cooper reported unnecessarily as a spotlight swept across their position. "Stay on course," Sullivan instructed. "Make for the east boundary." Ramirez should have created an opening in the fence. The Wolverine bounced across the uneven terrain, its suspension groaning under the stress of high-speed movement without proper tuning. Cooper handled the controls expertly, guiding the ungainly vehicle with precision born of extensive training. Behind them, pursuit vehicles were mobilizing, their headlights visible in the darkness. The MPs were responding faster than anticipated, potentially cutting off their escape route. "We got company," Thompson warned, monitoring the rear through the gunner's optics. "Two Humvees closing fast." Sullivan considered their options. They couldn't risk a direct confrontation with military police that would escalate the situation beyond recovery, yet they needed to complete their escape. "Cooper, cut through the impact area," Sullivan ordered, referring to a section of the range used for artillery practice and designated as off-limits due to potential unexploded ordnance. "Sir?" Cooper questioned, clearly surprised by the instruction. "Do it. They won't follow us through there. It violates safety protocols." Cooper adjusted their course, steering the Wolverine toward the marked boundaries of the impact area. As predicted, the pursuing vehicles slowed as they approached the restricted zone, unwilling to risk entering an area that might contain live ammunition. The Wolverine plowed through the warning signs, churning up dirt and vegetation as Cooper navigated by the glow of the instrument panels. Sullivan had calculated the risk carefully. This particular impact area hadn't been used for live fire exercises in months, making the danger minimal compared to the consequences of capture. They emerged from the restricted zone near the eastern boundary where Ramirez had promised to create an exit. Sure enough, a section of the perimeter fence had been cut away, providing just enough space for the Wolverine to squeeze through. "There's our exit," Sullivan pointed. "Take it slow. We don't want to damage the undercarriage." Cooper reduced speed, carefully maneuvering the vehicle through the opening. Metal scraped against metal as the Wolverine's sides brushed the remaining fence posts, but they made it through without significant damage. Once clear of the perimeter, Cooper accelerated again, following the route they had planned to the rendezvous point where Daniels and Dr. Winters waited with the transport vehicle. "We did it," Thompson said, his voice a mixture of disbelief and pride. "We actually stole a tank." "Recovered," Sullivan corrected automatically, though he shared the sentiment. What they had done was unprecedented in his long military career, unauthorized, possibly illegal, and absolutely necessary. They reached the rendezvous point, an abandoned quarry 20 miles from Fort Pickett, to find the rest of the team waiting anxiously. Ramirez had arrived minutes earlier, having executed her diversion and escaped separately. "Any problems?" Sullivan asked as he climbed down from the Wolverine. "None," Daniels reported. "Transport is ready. Route is clear. We've monitored radio traffic. There's confusion about exactly what happened. They know the vehicle is missing, but there are conflicting reports about who took it and why. Some chatter suggests it might be an authorized movement that wasn't properly communicated." Sullivan nodded, satisfied with the outcome. "Let's load up and move out. The longer we maintain this confusion, the better our chances of reaching West Virginia undetected." Under Thompson's direction, they carefully loaded the Wolverine onto the transport vehicle, securing it with chains and concealing it under tarps to disguise its distinctive profile. Within 30 minutes, they were on the road, traveling west toward the secluded property Ramirez had arranged for their use. Dawn was breaking as they crossed the Virginia-West Virginia border, the eastern sky painted in shades of orange and gold. Sullivan, riding with Ramirez in the lead vehicle, felt the weight of the past night's actions. They had crossed a line, one that could not be uncrossed. Whatever happened now, they were committed to seeing this through to the end. "No regrets, sir?" Ramirez asked, sensing his contemplation. Sullivan looked at the young captain, seeing in her the same determination and commitment to mission that had defined his own career. "Not about recovering the Wolverine," he said. "My only regret is that it came to this, that internal politics forced us to such measures." Ramirez nodded. "My father used to say that sometimes doing the right thing means breaking the rules. He learned that in Vietnam, said there were times when the mission and the men mattered more than the regulations." "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was," Ramirez replied quietly. "He died 3 years ago, cancer from Agent Orange exposure. But he never regretted his service, even knowing what it would eventually cost him." Sullivan understood. Military service often exacted delayed costs, whether physical or psychological. Yet the commitment remained. the willingness to sacrifice for a greater purpose. That same spirit now drove their unorthodox mission. They arrived at the West Virginia property by mid-morning, following a winding dirt road to a secluded valley where several outbuildings stood near a modest farmhouse. A gray-haired man emerged as they approached, watching with interest as the convoy of vehicles came to a stop. Ramirez jumped down from the cab and embraced the man. "Uncle Frank, thank you for this." "Anything for my favorite niece," he replied, eyeing the tarped vehicle on the transport with obvious curiosity. "Though when you said your team needed a place to work, I didn't expect you'd be bringing an entire armored vehicle." Sullivan approached, extending his hand. "Colonel James Sullivan, Mr. Ramirez, I can't tell you how much we appreciate your hospitality." Frank Ramirez shook Sullivan's hand firmly, his weathered face creasing in a smile. "Master Sergeant Frank Ramirez, retired. 5th Special Forces Group, 2 tours in Vietnam. Maria explained enough for me to understand you're doing important work that's run afoul of politics. That's all I need to know." Sullivan felt an immediate kinship with the former Special Forces soldier. They shared the unspoken brotherhood of combat veterans, men who had faced death together and understood the real costs of political decisions made far from the battlefield. "We need to set up a temporary testing facility," Sullivan explained. "Firing range, maintenance area, communications. It will be disruptive." Frank waved a hand dismissively. "The nearest neighbor is 5 miles away. You can make all the noise you want. The East Valley has a clear line of fire for about 3 kilometers. Should work for your purposes. The old barn can serve as your maintenance facility, plenty of space, good ventilation, power hookups from my generator. We'll compensate you for any damages and inconvenience," Sullivan assured him. Frank's expression hardened slightly. "I don't want money, Colonel. What I want is for our soldiers to have the equipment they need when they go into harm's way. Maria tells me that's what you're trying to ensure. That's payment enough for me." With Frank's help, they quickly established their makeshift facility. The barn proved ideal for their needs, with its high ceiling, concrete floor, and large doors. By mid-afternoon, they had unloaded the Wolverine and begun assessing the damage from Hamilton's partial disassembly and their hasty recovery operation. "Could have been worse," Thompson reported after a thorough inspection. "They were methodical, I'll give them that, but they had only just begun the real dismantling. Another hour, and we might not have been able to get it running again without major rebuilding." "How long to get it back to full operational status?" Sullivan asked. 3 days, maybe 4. Some components will need fabrication or modification since we can't exactly requisition replacements through normal channels now. Sullivan nodded. "Make it 2 days. We've lost time we can't afford to lose." While Thompson and Daniels worked on restoring the Wolverine, Ramirez established secure communications with Westmoreland, using encrypted channels to avoid detection. The general, though shocked by their actions, promised to provide what cover he could and to continue advocating for the project with the secretary. Dr. Winters, meanwhile, set up an impromptu laboratory in the farmhouse kitchen, continuing her work on the armor solutions using materials they had managed to transport from their original facility. She had developed a promising layered system that, while not as effective as true composite armor, provided significant protection at minimal weight cost. Cooper took responsibility for establishing the firing range in the East Valley, marking out distances and setting up target arrays using materials from the property and supplies they had brought. The lieutenant showed remarkable initiative, constructing moving target mechanisms from farm equipment parts and setting up a rudimentary but functional observation post. By the end of the second day, Thompson announced that the Wolverine was ready for testing. They had worked around the clock, catching sleep in shifts, driven by the knowledge that the final evaluation was now less than 2 weeks away. "She's not pretty," Thompson said as they gathered around the vehicle, "but she's functional. The hydraulic system is actually improved over our previous configuration. I took the opportunity to implement some modifications I'd been considering." Sullivan examined the Wolverine with critical eyes. The hasty repairs were evident in mismatched panels and exposed wiring harnesses, but the core systems appeared solid and well integrated. This was no longer a prototype in the traditional sense, but a battle-proven machine that had already survived its first engagement, albeit against American military police rather than enemy forces. "Let's test it," Sullivan decided. "Full live fire evaluation, multiple scenarios. I want to push it to the limits now so we know exactly what we're dealing with." The team moved to the makeshift range where Cooper had prepared a series of targets at varying distances. The Wolverine performed flawlessly, its rebuilt systems functioning even better than before the confiscation. Thompson's modifications to the hydraulic system provided smoother operation and more consistent recoil management, improving accuracy at longer ranges. After 2 hours of testing, Sullivan gathered the team for an assessment. The vehicle performs well, but we still have issues to address before the evaluation. The targeting system needs fine-tuning for moving targets, and the engine overheats under sustained high-speed operation. These are solvable problems, but they'll require focused effort. There's another issue, Daniels added. Hamilton will have expected us to take the Wolverine, and he'll be looking for it. We can hide here for now, but we'll need to return to Aberdeen for the final evaluation. How do we do that without being intercepted or arrested? It was a valid concern. By taking the Wolverine, they had crossed from bureaucratic maneuvering into potential criminal action. Hamilton would surely have military police watching for the vehicle and the team members. We need a diversion, Sullivan said, something to draw attention away from our approach to Aberdeen. Or a decoy, Ramirez suggested. Something that looks like the Wolverine but isn't. Let them chase the wrong target while we bring in the real one. The idea had merit. Can we construct something convincing enough to fool aerial surveillance? Sullivan asked. Frank Ramirez, who had been quietly supporting their operation with logistics and local knowledge, spoke up. I might have a solution. There's an old M113 armored personnel carrier at the Veterans of Foreign Wars post in Charleston. It's a display piece, not functional, but with some modification, it could pass for your vehicle from a distance. How would we get access to it? Dr. Winters asked. Frank smiled. The post commander was my platoon sergeant in Vietnam. If I ask, he'll help, no questions asked. The brotherhood runs deep. Sullivan considered the possibilities. A decoy could indeed draw away Hamilton's forces, creating an opportunity for the real Wolverine to reach Aberdeen undetected. But it would require precise timing and coordination. It could work, he acknowledged. Ramirez, work with your uncle to secure the M113. Thompson, what would it take to make it visually similar to the Wolverine? Thompson rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Sheet metal, paint, some creative metalwork. Nothing too complex. We could fabricate a fake gun barrel and turret to match the silhouette. From a distance or aerial surveillance, it would be convincing enough. Good. Get started on the designs. We'll need to move quickly. As the team dispersed to their tasks, Sullivan stepped outside, needing a moment alone to process the rapidly evolving situation. The sun was setting over the West Virginia mountains, painting the landscape in amber hues. It was peaceful here, far removed from the political battles of Washington and the life-or-death struggles of distant battlefields. Yet Sullivan felt no peace. The stakes of their mission weighed heavily upon him. He had led men into combat, made decisions that resulted in both victory and loss, but always within the framework of military order and chain of command. Now he operated outside that framework, guided only by his conviction that what they were doing was necessary for national security and the protection of future American soldiers. His solitude was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Winters, who approached with 2 mugs of coffee, offering one to Sullivan. Thought you could use this, she said. It's been a long couple of days. Sullivan accepted the mug with a nod of thanks. How's the armor system coming? Better than expected. Frank had some materials in his workshop that actually improved our design. We're achieving protection levels close to what we originally specified, despite the budget constraints. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching the last light fade from the sky. Finally, Dr. Winters spoke again. Can I ask you something personal, Colonel? Go ahead. Why is this so important to you? Important enough to risk your career, possibly your freedom? Sullivan considered the question carefully. Have you ever seen a soldier die because they didn't have the right equipment? Because someone decided that a certain capability wasn't necessary or cost-effective? No, she admitted. I have. In Vietnam, we had M48 tanks with inadequate armor and underpowered guns. Good men died because their vehicles couldn't protect them or effectively engage the enemy. In Desert Storm, we had the advantage. The Abrams was superior to anything the Iraqis fielded. The difference was night and day. American lives were saved because we had the right equipment. He took a sip of coffee before continuing. Hamilton's drones may be effective in certain scenarios, but they have vulnerabilities. If we face an enemy with the tank capabilities our intelligence suggests, and all we have are drones that can be jammed or shot down, more American soldiers will die. That's not acceptable to me. Not if there's something I can do to prevent it. Dr. Winters nodded slowly. I understand. I just wanted to be sure this wasn't about proving Hamilton wrong or fighting some personal battle. It's not, Sullivan assured her, though I won't deny their satisfaction in demonstrating that old-school experience still has value in our high-tech military. Their conversation was interrupted by Cooper, who approached at a run. Sir, we've got trouble. Captain Ramirez just received word from her contact at the Pentagon. Hamilton has somehow traced us to this location. Military police have been dispatched from Fort Lee with orders to secure the Wolverine and detain the entire team. ETA approximately 3 hours. Sullivan set down his coffee mug, his mind immediately shifting to tactical planning. Alert the team. We need to move the Wolverine immediately. How close is the decoy to completion? It's not even started, sir. Frank is still working on securing the M113. Then we need another solution. Sullivan thought quickly. Do we have any alternate locations prepared? Captain Ramirez mentioned a secondary site, a hunting cabin further into the mountains. Very remote, accessible only by logging roads, but it has no facilities for testing or maintenance. Sullivan weighed their options. Moving deeper into the wilderness would provide temporary security, but would severely hamper their ability to prepare for the evaluation. Yet staying meant certain capture. Get everyone together now, he ordered. We need to make decisions quickly. Within minutes, the team had assembled in the barn, tension evident in their faces as Sullivan explained the situation. Hamilton's people will be here in less than 3 hours. We need to decide our next move. We can't run forever, Thompson pointed out, and without proper facilities, we can't complete the necessary work on the Wolverine. We could split up, Daniel suggested. Move the Wolverine to the secondary location with a minimal team, while others create a diversion or false trail. That risks dividing our already limited resources, Dr. Winters countered. And it doesn't solve the fundamental problem we need to test and refine the vehicle before the evaluation. Frank Ramirez, who had been listening quietly, stepped forward. There's another option. Fight the legal battle while continuing your work. My brother is a JAG officer at the Pentagon. If what you've told me is accurate, Hamilton's confiscation of your vehicle was itself unauthorized. You had proper authority for the project from General Westmoreland. Your actions, while unorthodox, could be defended as protecting critical national security assets from improper interference. Sullivan considered this approach. That might work in the long run, but it doesn't solve our immediate problem. By the time any legal challenges work through the system, the evaluation will be over and the Wolverine project terminated. Not necessarily, Frank replied. A temporary restraining order could prevent Hamilton from interfering further, allowing you to continue your work while the legal issues are resolved. It was a viable strategy, but Sullivan saw a fundamental flaw. For that to work, we would need to surrender the Wolverine now, placing it under legal protection while the case proceeds. That means no further development or testing. The team fell silent, recognizing the impossible choice before them. Legal compliance meant the end of any real chance for the Wolverine to succeed in the evaluation. Continued defiance meant escalating their already precarious legal situation. Sullivan made his decision. We move the Wolverine tonight, but not to hide it. We're taking it directly to Washington, to the Pentagon itself. We'll present our case directly to the Secretary of Defense with the evidence of what we've accomplished despite Hamilton's interference. The audacity of the plan stunned the team. Ramirez was the first to recover. Sir, with respect, driving an unauthorized armored vehicle into the Pentagon is problematic at best. We won't drive it into the building, Sullivan clarified. We'll transport it to the parking area and request an immediate meeting with the Secretary. General Westmoreland will help arrange it once we're in position. It's extremely risky, Cooper warned. If anything goes wrong, we could all face serious charges. Yes, Sullivan acknowledged, but sometimes the direct approach is the only one that works. Hamilton has used bureaucracy and political maneuvering against us at every turn. We need to change the battlefield to one where those weapons are less effective. Face to face, with the Wolverine as physical evidence of our work, we have a chance to make our case. The team exchanged looks, weighing the proposal. Finally, Thompson spoke for all of them. Well, it's not the craziest thing I've done in my military career. Not even in the top 5. I'm in. One by one, the others voiced their agreement. The decision made, they moved with renewed purpose, preparing the Wolverine for transport and gathering the documentation and test data they would need to present their case. Frank Ramirez provided one final contribution, a contact with a commercial heavy equipment transporter who owed him a favor and wouldn't ask questions. With this arranged, they loaded the Wolverine and departed just as the sun began to rise, leaving behind an empty barn and a note for the arriving MPs explaining that the unauthorized confiscation had been returned to proper military authority. As their small convoy headed east toward Washington, Sullivan found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point. What had begun as a technical challenge had evolved into something more, a test of conviction, of the courage to stand by one's principles even when the easier path was compliance. The Wolverine itself embodied this philosophy. It wasn't the most elegant solution, nor the most technologically advanced. It represented the practical wisdom of experienced soldiers who understood that warfare was ultimately about human beings making decisions under pressure, not algorithms calculating optimal solutions in sterile environments. Whether their gambit would succeed remained to be seen. But Sullivan took pride in the team he had assembled and the work they had accomplished against tremendous odds. The Wolverine might not win the budget battle against Hamilton's drones, but it had already proven its worth in a more fundamental way. It had brought together a group of dedicated professionals willing to risk everything for what they believed was right. As Washington appeared on the horizon, Sullivan prepared himself for the final battle, not one fought with weapons and tactics, but with words and evidence, conviction and truth. It would be his last stand as a soldier, and perhaps the most important of his long career. The early morning light cast long shadows across the Pentagon parking area as Sullivan's convoy arrived. The massive five-sided building loomed before them, a physical embodiment of American military power and bureaucracy. Armed security personnel immediately approached as the heavy equipment transporter carrying the Wolverine came to a stop. "Military police, halt and identify yourselves," ordered a stern-faced officer, hand resting on his holstered sidearm. Sullivan stepped forward, his uniform immaculate despite the sleepless night of travel. "Colonel James Sullivan, United States Army. I'm here to see the Secretary of Defense regarding Project Wolverine." He presented his military ID with steady hands. The officer examined it carefully, then looked back at the tarp-covered vehicle on the transport. "Do you have authorization to bring this vehicle onto Pentagon grounds, Colonel?" "I have direct authorization from General Harold Westmoreland, Deputy Chief of Staff of the Army," Sullivan replied. It wasn't entirely true, but Sullivan knew Westmoreland would back him once informed of their arrival. The officer appeared unconvinced. "I'll need to verify that, sir. Please remain here while I contact command." As the officer stepped away to radio for instructions, Sullivan turned to his team. They stood beside the transport, expressions tense but determined. Thompson, Daniels, Dr. Winters, Cooper, and Ramirez. Each understood the magnitude of what they were attempting and the potential consequences if they failed. "This is where it gets complicated," Sullivan told them quietly. "Once word reaches Hamilton, he'll do everything in his power to have us detained before we can speak to the Secretary." "Then we need to move quickly," Ramirez said. "I could try contacting Westmoreland directly through back channels." Before Sullivan could respond, additional military police vehicles arrived, surrounding the transport. The situation was escalating faster than anticipated. "Colonel Sullivan," the MP officer called as he returned, "I have orders to detain you and your team pending investigation into the unauthorized removal of military property from Fort Pickett. Please surrender any weapons and accompany us inside." Sullivan had expected this but had hoped for more time. He nodded to his team, signaling compliance. There was no benefit in resisting. Now it would only reinforce Hamilton's narrative that they were rogue operators acting against proper authority. As they were escorted into the Pentagon, Sullivan noticed the MPs made no immediate move to secure or examine the Wolverine itself. Their focus was on the personnel, not the vehicle, a tactical error that might prove advantageous. Inside, they were separated and taken to individual rooms for questioning. Sullivan found himself in a spare conference room, accompanied by two stern-faced counterintelligence officers. He recognized the tactic isolation to prevent coordination of stories, standard procedure for suspected security breaches. "Colonel Sullivan," began the senior officer, "you've had a distinguished career. Bronze Star, Silver Star, multiple combat deployments, which makes your recent actions all the more difficult to understand." Sullivan met the man's gaze steadily. "My actions have been in service to national security and the protection of American soldiers. The Wolverine Project addresses a critical capability gap that threatens our forces in potential future conflicts." "By stealing military equipment and evading authorities?" the officer asked skeptically. "By preventing the illegal interference with an authorized program," Sullivan countered. "General Westmoreland can confirm that Project Wolverine was established with proper authorization. Its mandate was to develop a counter to advanced enemy armor capabilities identified by intelligence sources. The questioning continued for over an hour, Sullivan providing detailed accounts of the project's inception, Hamilton's obstruction, and their rationale for reclaiming the prototype. He was careful to accept personal responsibility for all decisions, shielding his team from potential consequences. "I acted alone in ordering the recovery of the vehicle," Sullivan insisted. "My team followed my commands as they were trained to do." The officers exchanged glances, clearly skeptical of this claim given the complexity of the operation. Nevertheless, they made notes and continued their methodical questioning. Meanwhile, in another part of the building, General Westmoreland was being briefed on the situation. The arrival of Sullivan's team with the Wolverine prototype had created a storm of activity within the Pentagon, with competing narratives from Hamilton's supporters and those sympathetic to Sullivan's cause. Westmoreland listened carefully to his aide's report, then made a decision. "Get me in to see the secretary immediately." "Sir, General Hamilton is already meeting with him regarding the Wolverine situation," the aide advised. "All the more reason for me to be there," Westmoreland replied grimly, "and have Colonel Sullivan brought to the secretary's office as soon as possible. Just Sullivan, not the others." 20 minutes later, Sullivan was escorted from the conference room by military police. Instead of returning to detention, however, he found himself directed toward the executive section of the Pentagon. Hope stirred within him. Westmoreland must have intervened. The Secretary of Defense's outer office was imposing, designed to project authority and gravitas. Sullivan was instructed to wait as the MPs withdrew, leaving him under the watchful eye of the Secretary's executive assistant. Minutes passed, stretching Sullivan's already taut nerves. Finally, the inner door opened, and General Hamilton emerged, his expression shifting from satisfaction to shock as he registered Sullivan's presence. "What is he doing here?" Hamilton demanded of the assistant. "This man should be in custody." Before the assistant could respond, General Westmoreland appeared in the doorway behind Hamilton. "The secretary wants to hear both sides directly, Richard. An unusual concept in Washington. I know truth from the source rather than filtered through layers of staff." Hamilton's jaw tightened, but he regained his composure quickly. "Colonel Sullivan has violated numerous regulations and potentially committed criminal acts. His presence here legitimizes those actions." "The secretary will determine that," Westmoreland replied evenly. "Colonel, please come in." Sullivan followed Westmoreland into the secretary's office, consciously straightening his posture as he entered. The Secretary of Defense sat behind a massive desk, glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed documents before him. At 62, Secretary Lawrence Miller had a reputation as a pragmatic leader with extensive experience in both military and corporate sectors. His expression revealed nothing as he looked up at Sullivan. "Colonel Sullivan," the secretary began, "I've been hearing quite a lot about you and your project these past weeks. Most recently, about your unorthodox method of transporting a prototype vehicle across state lines after its confiscation by military authorities." "Mr. Secretary, I can explain," Sullivan began. Miller held up a hand. "I'm sure you can, and you'll have that opportunity. But first, I want to be clear about something. Regardless of the merits of your project or General Hamilton's objections to it, the United States military cannot function without adherence to the chain of command and proper procedures. What you've done represents a serious breach of both." Sullivan nodded. "I understand that, sir, and I accept full responsibility for those actions." "Good," Miller said. "Now explain to me why I shouldn't have you court-martialed immediately." Sullivan took a deep breath, recognizing this moment as perhaps his only opportunity to save not just his career, but the Wolverine project itself. "Mr. Secretary, the Wolverine project was established with proper authorization to address a critical threat, an enemy main battle tank with capabilities that outmatch our existing systems. General Westmoreland can confirm this." He glanced at Westmoreland, who nodded in affirmation. "General Hamilton systematically undermined our work," Sullivan continued, "first through budget manipulation, then by interfering with our supply chain, and finally by confiscating our prototype under the false pretense of safety concerns." Hamilton interjected. "Those concerns were entirely legitimate. The Wolverine concept violates basic engineering principles, placing a weapon system on a chassis never designed to support it. It represents an unacceptable risk to personnel." "Yet our testing demonstrated otherwise," Sullivan countered. "The modified vehicle successfully fired multiple rounds with no structural failures. We addressed the engineering challenges through innovative solutions, precisely the kind of adaptation that has characterized American military technology throughout our history." The secretary studied both men thoughtfully. General Westmoreland, you authorized this project. What's your assessment of its viability? Westmoreland stepped forward. Sir, the Wolverine represents a different philosophy than General Hamilton's drone program. Both approaches have merit, and ideally, our forces would have access to both capabilities. The question isn't whether drones or armored vehicles are superior, it's whether we're providing our troops with all the tools they need to succeed against evolving threats. Miller nodded, then turned to Sullivan. You've gone to extraordinary lengths to preserve this project, Colonel. Why? What makes the Wolverine so important that you'd risk your career and freedom? It was the question Sullivan had been asking himself throughout this ordeal. His answer came from the heart, unplanned and unfiltered. Because I've held dying men in my arms, Mr. Secretary. Men who might have lived if their equipment had been better, if someone in Washington had made different decisions. In Vietnam, in Iraq, in conflicts around the world, American soldiers have sometimes faced enemies with superior weapons because we failed to anticipate threats or respond to them adequately. Sullivan leaned forward, his intensity palpable. Hamilton's drones are impressive technology, but they have vulnerabilities. Enemy electronic warfare, adverse weather conditions, communications disruption. When those systems fail, our soldiers need alternatives. The Wolverine provides that alternative, a vehicle that can operate independently under human control in the most challenging conditions. The secretary considered this, then asked, and what of Hamilton's safety concerns? Are you risking American lives with an unstable platform? Every new weapon system involves risk during development, Sullivan replied. The Wolverine has performed successfully in multiple firing tests. Yes, it pushes engineering boundaries, but it does so in ways that have proven effective. My team includes some of the most experienced and knowledgeable personnel in the Army. They wouldn't endorse a system they believed would endanger American soldiers. Miller sat back, glancing between the three officers. Gentlemen, here's my dilemma. I have a promising project that addresses a legitimate threat, developed by a team willing to risk everything to see it completed. I also have serious concerns about protocol violations and the precedent they set, and I have two of my senior officers in fundamental disagreement about military doctrine. He stood, moving to the window that overlooked the Pentagon courtyard. Colonel Sullivan, is your prototype vehicle here on Pentagon grounds? Yes, sir. It's on the transport in the south parking area. Good. I want to see it. Not in a formal demonstration, but up close, right now. The request surprised all three men, but Sullivan quickly recovered. Of course, Mr. Secretary. Minutes later, they stood beside the transport as Sullivan directed the removal of the tarps covering the Wolverine. In daylight, the vehicle's unconventional design was even more apparent. The modified Bradley chassis with its lowered profile, the Abrams 120mm gun integrated into a redesigned turret, the composite armor panels developed by Dr. Winters. The secretary circled the vehicle slowly, studying its features with a practiced eye. You built this in less than 2 months? Yes, sir, Sullivan confirmed, with limited resources and despite significant obstacles. Miller nodded, then turned to Hamilton. And your alternative is the Hunter drone system, which I observed at Aberdeen. Impressive technology, certainly. But Colonel Sullivan raises valid points about its vulnerabilities. Hamilton stepped forward. Mr. Secretary, all systems have vulnerabilities. The difference is that when a drone is compromised, we lose equipment, not American lives. The Wolverine puts operators directly in harm's way with inadequate protection compared to a main battle tank. A fair point, Miller acknowledged. Those soldiers accept risk as part of their duty. He turned back to Sullivan. I'd like to see it in operation. Sullivan hesitated. Sir, we haven't had an opportunity to complete our final adjustments after recovering the vehicle. All the more reason, Miller insisted. I want to see it as it is, not in a choreographed demonstration. Recognizing the importance of this moment, Sullivan nodded. Thompson, prepare the vehicle for operation. Cooper, you'll drive. I'll command and operate the gun. As his team members hurried to comply, Sullivan briefly updated the secretary on the Wolverine's capabilities and the modifications they had implemented to overcome the engineering challenges. Miller listened attentively, asking pointed questions that revealed his technical knowledge and strategic understanding. Within minutes, the Wolverine was ready. Sullivan, Thompson, and Cooper took their positions inside the vehicle, while Westmoreland, Hamilton, and the secretary observed from a safe distance. We'll demonstrate mobility first, Sullivan announced through the external speaker system, then turret rotation and weapon elevation. The Wolverine's engine roared to life, the sound echoing across the parking area. Cooper guided the vehicle down the ramp from the transport, executing a series of maneuvers to demonstrate its mobility and responsiveness. Despite its modified configuration, the Wolverine moved with surprising agility, a testament to Thompson's engineering skill. Next, Sullivan demonstrated the turret systems, rotating the gun through its full range of motion and adjusting elevation to simulate target acquisition. The mechanisms operated smoothly without the hydraulic issues that had plagued earlier tests. "Mr. Secretary," Sullivan called, "with your permission, we'd like to demonstrate the fire control system using dry fire procedures. No live ammunition will be used." Miller considered, then nodded. "Proceed, Colonel." Sullivan activated the targeting systems, which Daniels had refined to compensate for the Wolverine's unique configuration. The computer acquired and tracked multiple theoretical targets, the gun adjusting automatically to follow these digital phantoms. "Target acquired, simulated range 3,000 meters, Sullivan reported. "Firing solution computed. In a live fire situation, we would now engage with the 120mm main gun." He completed the firing sequence, minus the actual discharge of a round. The systems responded perfectly, cycling through to simulate reloading for a subsequent shot. As the demonstration concluded, Sullivan and his crew emerged from the vehicle. The Secretary's expression remained neutral, offering no hint of his assessment. "Impressive improvisation, Colonel," Miller said finally, "particularly given the constraints you've operated under." He turned to Westmoreland and Hamilton. "Gentlemen, I've seen enough. Let's return to my office." The return to the Pentagon building was conducted in silence, each man absorbed in his own thoughts. Sullivan felt cautiously optimistic the Wolverine had performed well, demonstrating its viability as a concept. But the Secretary had revealed nothing of his decision regarding the project's future or Sullivan's fate. Back in Miller's office, the Secretary returned to his desk, regarding the three officers thoughtfully. "I've made my decision," he announced without preamble. "The Wolverine project will continue, with full funding restored." Sullivan felt a surge of vindication and relief, quickly tempered as Miller continued. "However, there will be changes. Colonel Sullivan, while your dedication to this project is commendable, your methods are not. You're relieved of command, effective immediately. You'll face administrative discipline for the unauthorized removal of military equipment, but in recognition of your service record in the extenuating circumstances, I'm not recommending court-martial." The relief Sullivan had felt moments ago evaporated, replaced by a hollow sensation in his chest. After 30 years of service, his career would end not in honor but in disciplinary action. "General Hamilton," Miller continued, turning to the drone advocate, "your program will also continue. The Hunter system has demonstrated significant capabilities that merit full development. However, I find your actions in obstructing a properly authorized project concerning. The military benefits from diversity of thought and approach, not from internal power struggles that undermine legitimate programs." Hamilton's expression remained impassive, though a muscle twitched in his jaw. "General Westmoreland will assume direct oversight of both programs," Miller declared. "I want these systems developed as complementary capabilities, not competing ones. Our soldiers deserve the best tools we can provide, whether those tools are unmanned drones or crewed vehicles." He focused on Sullivan again. "Colonel, before you process out, I want you to brief your replacement fully on the Wolverine concept and development to date. Your team will remain intact under new leadership." "Who will that leadership be, sir?" Sullivan asked, struggling to maintain his professional demeanor despite the devastating personal news. "Lieutenant Colonel Michael Daniels will assume command of Project Wolverine," Miller replied. "His background in both aviation and electronic systems provides the balance of traditional and innovative thinking this project requires." Sullivan nodded, genuinely pleased for Daniels despite his own circumstances. The former Apache pilot had proven himself throughout the Wolverine's development, demonstrating both technical expertise and leadership qualities. "Finally," Miller said, "I want a joint demonstration of both systems in 90 days. Not as competitors, but as elements of an integrated force structure. General Westmoreland, you'll oversee the preparation and execution of this demonstration." Westmoreland nodded. "Yes, Mr. Secretary." Miller stood, signaling the end of the meeting. "Gentlemen, the future of warfare will not be defined by a single technology or approach. It will require thoughtful integration of multiple capabilities, both manned and unmanned. Let's ensure America leads in that integration." As they left the Secretary's office, Sullivan found himself walking alongside Hamilton. The tension between them remained palpable, but something had shifted. "You won, you know," Hamilton said quietly. Your concept will be developed. Your team stays intact. All it cost was your career. Sullivan considered this. If that's the price for ensuring our soldiers have the tools they need, I'd pay it again without hesitation. Hamilton studied him for a moment. I never questioned your dedication, Sullivan. Only your judgment. For what it's worth, I believe the Secretary made the right decision. Both our approaches have merit. With that, Hamilton departed, leaving Sullivan with the cold comfort that his adversary had found a measure of respect for him, if not agreement with his methods. Westmoreland approached, placing a hand on Sullivan's shoulder. It's not the ending either of us wanted, Jim, but the Wolverine will be built, and it will save American lives. That's a legacy to be proud of. Sullivan nodded, grateful for his friend's support. What happens now? You brief Daniels, say goodbye to your team, and process out, Westmoreland replied. I've arranged for your retirement to be handled with as much dignity as possible, given the circumstances. Full pension, honorable discharge despite the administrative action. The Secretary agreed it was appropriate given your service record. It was more than Sullivan had expected, but still a bitter end to a distinguished career. He would leave the Army under a cloud, his final act one of technical insubordination, despite the moral justification he felt. The briefing with Daniels took place that afternoon in a secure conference room. Sullivan's team had been released from questioning, the Secretary's decision having rendered the investigation moot. They gathered around the table, subdued by the news of Sullivan's removal, but relieved that the project would continue. The Wolverine's core concept remains sound, Sullivan explained, reviewing the technical specifications and developmental history. The challenges we've encountered and overcome provide a roadmap for the final refinement phases. With proper funding and support, you should be able to deliver a field-ready prototype within 90 days. Daniels took notes, asking pertinent questions that demonstrated his grasp of both the technical and tactical aspects of the system. Sullivan found himself increasingly confident in the younger officer's ability to lead the project to completion. What about the crew configuration? Daniels asked. We've been operating with 3, but standard Bradley crews are 3 plus infantry. How do you envision the production version? Sullivan considered this. 3 core crew commander, gunner, driver. The extra space could be used for ammunition storage or specialized equipment rather than personnel. In combat, the Wolverine will need to remain mobile, striking from advantageous positions, then relocating before the enemy can respond. Additional crew would complicate that mission profile. The briefing continued for hours, Sullivan ensuring that every aspect of the Wolverine's development was thoroughly documented and explained. He wanted to leave nothing to chance, no detail that might impede the project's success after his departure. As the session concluded, Daniels approached Sullivan privately. Sir, I want you to know that I'll carry this forward exactly as you envisioned it. The Wolverine will remain true to your concept, a tank hunter that combines the best of traditional armored warfare with modern technology. Sullivan nodded, touched by the younger officer's commitment. Make it your own, Mike. Improve it, refine it. Just make sure it works when our soldiers need it. Later, Sullivan met with each team member individually, thanking them for their dedication and innovation. Thompson, the veteran mechanic whose expertise had made the Wolverine physically possible. DeMarter Winters, whose armor solutions had balanced protection with mobility. Cooper, the young officer who represented the next generation of armor leaders. And Ramirez, whose logistical wizardry had kept the project functioning despite extraordinary obstacles. Each conversation was difficult, laden with emotions Sullivan typically kept in check. But these people had become more than colleagues. They had become a band of brothers and sisters united by a common purpose and shared challenges. Saying goodbye felt like leaving family. His final conversation was with Ramirez, who had been coordinating his departure procedures. Everything's arranged, sir, she reported. Transport to Fort Belvoir for out-processing, then civilian transportation to wherever you'd like to go. Your personal effects have been collected from your quarters. Sullivan thanked her, then asked, Will you stay with the project, Captain? Yes, sir. Colonel Daniels asked me to continue as logistics officer, and to be honest, I want to see the Wolverine through to completion. After everything we've been through, it feels personal now. Sullivan understood completely. Take care of them, Maria. They're a special group of people. What will you do, sir? She asked. After the Army, after 30 years of structure and purpose, of clear missions and defined authority, after the only life he had known since he was 18 years old. I'm not sure yet, Sullivan admitted. I've had some offers over the years consulting, corporate security, defense contracting. Never gave them much thought because I always assumed I'd wear the uniform until they forced me to retire. He smiled ruefully. Turns out I was right about that part, just not how it would happen. Ramirez hesitated, then said, "Sir, for what it's worth, what you did for the Wolverine, for all of us, it matters. When that vehicle saves American lives in combat, it will be because you were willing to put everything on the line for what you believed in." Sullivan nodded, touched by her words. "Thank you, Captain. That means a great deal." 3 months later, Sullivan stood on a grassy knoll overlooking the demonstration range at Aberdeen Proving Ground. He wore civilian clothes now, the unfamiliar feeling of a sport coat and slacks replacing the uniform that had been his second skin for decades. A VIP badge hung around his neck, his status as an invited observer rather than a participant still strange after a lifetime of command. Below on the sprawling range, final preparations were underway for the joint demonstration of the Wolverine and Hunter systems. Sullivan had followed the project's progress from afar, receiving occasional updates from Daniels or Westmoreland. The Wolverine had evolved significantly in the intervening months, its systems refined, its capabilities enhanced. It remained true to the original concept, but had benefited from the increased resources and official support that followed the Secretary's decision. A figure approached across the observation area, and Sullivan recognized Hamilton. The general looked as immaculate as ever in his service uniform, though Sullivan noted a few more strands of gray at his temples. "Sullivan," Hamilton greeted him with a nod. "Didn't expect to see you here." "Westmoreland arranged it," Sullivan replied. "Thought I might want to see how it turned out." Hamilton nodded, gazing out at the range where both the Wolverine and several Hunter drones were positioned. "Your team did good work. The production version incorporates several improvements, but the core concept remains intact." Sullivan appreciated the acknowledgement. "And your Hunter system? I've read it's performed well in extended testing." "Beyond expectations," Hamilton confirmed. "Particularly the new electronic warfare-resistant communication suite. Your concerns about vulnerability to jamming helped drive those improvements, actually." They stood in surprisingly comfortable silence for a moment. Two old warriors who had fought each other as fiercely as they had fought America's enemies, now finding a measure of mutual respect in the aftermath. "The Secretary was right, Hamilton said finally, about the integration of manned and unmanned systems. The joint exercises have demonstrated capabilities neither system could achieve alone." Sullivan nodded. He had come to the same conclusion after reviewing the preliminary reports. The Wolverine's ground presence complemented the Hunter's aerial surveillance and strike capabilities. Together, they presented an enemy with multiple threats from multiple domains, forcing impossible choices and creating vulnerabilities that either system alone might not generate. The demonstration began with the Hunter drones taking flight, their sleek forms rising into the clear sky. Below, the Wolverine moved into position, its profile lower and more predatory than a conventional tank, designed for concealment and ambush rather than frontal assault. The scenario simulated an encounter with enemy armor supported by infantry and air defense systems. The Hunter drones performed the initial reconnaissance, identifying targets and neutralizing air defenses to create a safer operating environment for the Wolverines. Then the tank hunters moved in, using terrain features for cover as they approached their targets. The coordination was impressive, the two systems operating as elements of a unified force rather than separate entities. Sullivan felt a surge of pride seeing the Wolverine execute exactly the kind of tactics he had envisioned in striking from unexpected angles, using mobility to compensate for lighter armor, employing its powerful gun to devastating effect before relocating to avoid counterfire. When the demonstration concluded, the observers burst into applause. The Secretary of Defense, present for this showcase of new military capabilities, appeared particularly pleased, engaged in animated conversation with the Joint Chiefs as they discussed the implications for future force structure. Westmoreland approached Sullivan and Hamilton, a satisfied expression on his face. "Gentlemen, I believe we can call this a success. The integration has exceeded our expectations," Sullivan agreed. Despite the personal costs, seeing the Wolverine performing its intended role alongside the Hunter drones validated the struggles and sacrifices of the development process. American soldiers would have both systems available when they faced advanced enemy armor, providing options and redundancy that could prove decisive in combat. As the gathering began to disperse, a younger officer approached Sullivan, someone he didn't immediately recognize. The man came to attention and saluted crisply, an unexpected gesture given Sullivan's civilian status. Colonel Sullivan, sir, Staff Sergeant Wright, formerly of the 2nd Armored Regiment, under your command in Iraq. Sullivan returned the salute automatically, then extended his hand. At ease, Sergeant. Good to see you. What brings you here? I'm assigned to the 1st Operational Wolverine Battalion, sir. We're standing up next month at Fort Hood. I wanted to thank you personally. My brother was killed in action in Afghanistan when his vehicle hit an IED. The Wolverine's speed and firepower would have given him a fighting chance. Wright's voice caught slightly. What you built matters, sir. It's going to save lives. The simple statement struck Sullivan more powerfully than any formal recognition could have. This was why he had risked everything for the Wolverine, not for career advancement or personal validation, but for the men and women who would rely on it in combat. Soldiers like Wright and his fallen brother represented the human reality behind the technical specifications in budget battles. Thank you, Sergeant, Sullivan said, gripping the younger man's hand firmly. The Wolverine was a team effort. Make it count out there. After Wright departed, Sullivan found himself alone, watching as the demonstration vehicles were prepared for transport back to their respective facilities. The Wolverine, once a controversial hybrid born of necessity and improvisation, now stood as an official addition to America's arsenal, its distinctive profile soon to become familiar on battlefields wherever American forces were deployed. Westmoreland joined him for a final conversation. Any regrets, Jim? Sullivan considered the question carefully. About pushing the Wolverine forward? Not for a moment. About how I did it? He shrugged. I wish there had been another way, but given the same circumstances, I'd make the same choices. Westmoreland nodded, understanding. You know, there's still a role for you in all this. The secretary mentioned the possibility of bringing you on as a civilian consultant for the Wolverine deployment. Your experience would be invaluable during the initial field integration. The offer was unexpected, a potential path back to the project that had cost him so much, yet given him a final defining purpose. I'd like that, Sullivan acknowledged. Very much. As they walked toward the parking area, Sullivan took a last look at the Wolverine. In that moment, he saw not just a weapon system, but a philosophy incarnate, the belief that human judgment and presence on the battlefield remained essential despite technological advances. The Wolverine represented adaptation and innovation in service of that belief, combining traditional combat wisdom with modern capabilities. His military career had ended differently than he had imagined, without the formal ceremonies and accolades that typically mark the conclusion of 3 decades of service. Yet Sullivan felt a deeper satisfaction in knowing that his final contribution would continue long after he was gone, protecting American soldiers in conflicts yet to come. The sun was setting as Sullivan drove away from Aberdeen, casting long shadows across the demonstration range. Behind him, the Wolverine stood silhouetted against the fading light, a testament to what could be accomplished when dedication to mission overcame bureaucratic obstacles and conventional thinking. 5 years later, Sullivan stood beside Westmoreland, now retired himself, as they watched the unveiling of the next-generation Wolverine at the Army's Ground Vehicle Development Center. The new model incorporated lessons learned from field deployments of the original version, with enhanced electronic systems, improved armor, and more efficient power management. They've kept the core concept intact, Westmoreland observed. Your influence is still evident, even with all the improvements. Sullivan nodded, noting how the vehicle retained the low-profile and mobile hunter philosophy of his original design. They've made it better, which is exactly what should happen, and Hamilton's drone technology has been integrated effectively. Indeed, the new Wolverine featured advanced data link systems that allowed it to receive targeting information directly from hunter drones, creating a network system that leveraged the strengths of both platforms. It was the embodiment of the integrated approach Secretary Miller had mandated years earlier. After the ceremony, Sullivan found himself face-to-face with Hamilton, now also retired but serving as a senior advisor to the Defense Industrial Base. Not bad for a stopgap solution, Hamilton said, nodding toward the new Wolverine. Sullivan smiled at the reference to the project's origins. Sometimes the temporary fixes turn out to be the most enduring. Hamilton nodded thoughtfully. We were both right, you know, and both wrong. I was too focused on technology at the expense of the human element. You were perhaps too wedded to traditional approaches. The best solution incorporated both perspectives. It was as close to an admission of error as Hamilton would ever offer, and Sullivan accepted it in the spirit intended. The important thing is that our soldiers have the tools they need. Everything else is secondary. As the event concluded, Sullivan walked through the display area, examining the various vehicles and systems showcased by the Army. Young officers and enlisted personnel moved among the exhibits, their expressions reflecting the same enthusiasm and dedication he had felt throughout his own career. The faces and technologies changed, but the essential character of the military remained consistent service, sacrifice, and commitment to mission. A lieutenant colonel approached, introducing himself as the commander of the 1st Wolverine Battalion, recently returned from deployment. Mr. Sullivan, it's an honor to meet you. Your vehicle performed brilliantly in our recent operations. The combination of firepower and mobility saved American lives multiple times under combat conditions. Sullivan thanked him, asking specific questions about the Wolverine's field performance and listening attentively to the answers. This was his legacy, not the administrative reprimand in his personnel file or the abrupt end to his military career, but the tangible impact of the Wolverine program on America's combat capabilities and the safety of its soldiers. As he prepared to depart, Sullivan took one last look at the next-generation Wolverine, its angular form representing the culmination of a journey that had begun with desperate improvisation and evolved into a core element of American armored doctrine. The project that had cost him his career had ultimately vindicated his vision and secured his legacy. Outside, the setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and gold, reminiscent of that final day at Aberdeen 5 years earlier. Sullivan felt a profound sense of closure and accomplishment. The Army continued its eternal mission of preparing for the next conflict, adapting and evolving its tools and tactics. The Wolverine was now part of that evolution, a bridge between traditional armored warfare and the increasingly electronic battle space of the future. As Sullivan drove away, he reflected on the lesson of the Wolverine program, the importance of balancing innovation with experience, technology with human judgment. It was a lesson as relevant to military operations as to life itself, recognizing when to embrace change and when to hold fast to proven principles. The Wolverine had begun as a solution to a specific threat, but had become something more, a symbol of American adaptability and the enduring importance of the human element in warfare. In a world increasingly dominated by autonomous systems and artificial intelligence, the Wolverine stood as a reminder that technology remained a tool in service to human decision-makers, not a replacement for them. For James Sullivan, that recognition represented the culmination of his life's work and the assurance that his final battle, fought not against a foreign enemy, but against bureaucracy and conventional thinking, had been worth every sacrifice it demanded. The Wolverine would roll into combat long after he was gone, carrying with it the philosophy and determination that had defined his service to his country. It was, he decided, a fitting legacy for a soldier,